Tonight, the telescopes are recording thin streaks of light crossing the sky. And once again, there is no star behind them. Light with no place of origin. Signals released by something that has never existed. There are nights when the sky seems too quiet, as if the universe is resting between thoughts. Nights when every layer of darkness feels settled, unmoving, waiting for something to disturb it. And on such a night, when the air above the observatories becomes still like a held breath, a single line of brightness appears where the maps say nothing exists. It does not erupt. It does not flare like a star being born. It simply arrives thin, fragile, almost shy. A thread of light crossing a region that should be indistinguishable from the void. Astronomers pause when they see it, not because it is bright, but because it is wrong. The maps have warned them for decades. There is nothing there. No dust cloud. No collapsing core. No ancient star cooling into silence. Nothing. Emptiness so perfect that a single photon should not find a home within it. And yet, night after night, a quiet streak slides across that emptiness, leaving behind a question that refuses to stay unanswered. If a light travels through the universe, it must come from somewhere. So why does this one seem homeless? The earliest detections were dismissed without hesitation. A malfunction, a sensor exposed to a cosmic particle, a misalignment between mirrors, a coincidence mistaken for significance, but the light returned, again and again and again. Always faint, always steady, always in the same hollow corner of the sky. There is something unnerving about the persistence of a thing that should not exist. One observatory reported it over a decade ago. Then another saw the same thing years later. Then a third. Observatories separated by oceans and continents. Different instruments, different designs, different teams, yet the same streaks, recorded with the same precision, with the same spectral purity. A purity that no natural light should possess. Normal starlight carries dust, signatures, distortions, memories. It carries the evidence of the chaos it has passed through. Turbulence, gas, plasma, gravity, but these lights carry none of that. They travel like delicate lines drawn through untouched space. No scatter, no noise, no scars of the journey. It is as if they were created in a chamber where the universe has not yet placed any matter. And that detail alone would be unsettling enough, if not for the fact that the lights resemble the early glow of a star preparing to form. Not a real star, not a star that survived the collapse and ignited, but the faint whisper of one that almost existed. Scientists began to notice something else. The spectral lines of the streaks resemble known stellar categories almost. Some lines match the early development of a star like our Sunday. Others resemble cooler stars. But all of them are missing the final pieces, as if the light was taken from a blueprint rather than from a finished object. A melody missing its last notes. A painting missing its final layer. A life missing its first breath. One physicist described it like this: "It feels like seeing the shadow of a creature that never lived." And perhaps that is the closest truth we have, because the more deeply researchers look into these streaks, the more one realization rises quietly from beneath the data. Stars that never fully formed might still leave light behind. Imagine a stellar core gathering, building pressure, drawing material inward, preparing for the moment of ignition, only to collapse in silence, erased from existence by a sudden imbalance or a gravitational theft from a neighboring region. A star erased before the universe allowed it to shine. But in that brief moment, when the core trembles between becoming and vanishing, a flicker escapes, a pulse, a sigh, a thin, bright thread slipping free from a future that has just been denied. Light from something that almost was. The telescopes do not know how to categorize such a thing. Astronomers do not have a word for it, and the universe does not pause to explain. It simply releases these quiet streaks into the night, letting them wander across billions of kilometers until they fall gently upon the lenses of instruments built by beings who barely understand where they live. And yet, the streaks keep coming. Some appear alone, some arrive in pairs, Some form loose arcs, like echoes of a curve that a star might have drawn if it had been allowed to survive. And the most disturbing detail remains. Every streak comes from a region where no structure exists. No dust, no mass, no gravitational imprint. Nothing that could hide the remains of a star. Nothing that could explain the light. If light is evidence, this is evidence of something that never happened. There is an idea whispered among astrophysicists who stay awake longer than they should, who stare at the data until the numbers begin to feel alive. They propose that the universe has more than events. It has intentions, possibilities, branches of reality that rise and collapse before they ever have a chance to be born. And when those branches collapse, something leaks through. A residue, a memory, a brightness that is not attached to matter, a light that is not loyal to the event that should have created it. As if the universe is haunted by the futures it deletes. There is a certain sadness in this thought, a cosmic melancholy. Because if every possibility leaves behind a trace, then these streaks might be the last breath of a star that never had a chance to breathe. A star erased before it existed long enough to be remembered. This idea would be poetic if it were not so precise. The energy patterns of the streaks are consistent across multiple detections. They do not waver. They repeat with remarkable clarity. They behave as though they come from a process, some mechanism that follows rules we do not yet understand, rules that apply to something that is not fully real. Some physicists suspect that these lights might not truly belong to our universe, that they might be slipping in through microscopic faults in the cosmic boundary. They speak of neighboring spaces, adjacent realms with structures so thin and delicate that a fluctuation could allow light to seep through. Like a thread poking through the seam of a garment, like a grain of dust slipping through the crack beneath a door, like a whisper bleeding through a wall too thin to remain silent. But even if that were true, the mystery remains. Why does the leaked light look like the beginning of a star? Why does it carry the signature of an existence that never completed itself? Before we drift deeper, let me speak softly to the ones listening in this quiet room of the night. You are listening to Whispers of the Universe. If your heart is gentle enough to leave a small touch of support, you may like, you may share, you may subscribe. Even the faintest gesture helps this quiet space continue breathing. Now, let us return to the darkness where the unexplained streaks continue their fragile journey. There is a moment during long observation sessions when astronomers stop questioning whether the streaks are errors. Something about their repetition becomes too deliberate, too graceful, too patterned. They move as if they belong to a choreography beyond our sight, a dance written by a process we do not recognize. The more researchers study their behavior, the more troubling details appear. The streaks do not bend the way light should bend when passing near galaxies or clusters. They do not curve. They do not obey. They travel as if the gravitational fields around them are illusions. Light should bow in the presence of mass, but these lines glide straight, serene, untouched, as though they originate from a place where gravity has a different shape, or perhaps from a moment that does not exist in our timeline. Some detections show that the streaks align with regions predicted to host stars millions of years ago, but those stars never formed. Those clouds never ignited. Those cores never stabilized. The universe prepared the stage, gathered the material, shaped the conditions, and then abandoned the plan. Yet the light arrived anyway. Imagine a script written for a character who is never born, but whose lines remain printed in the margins. That is what these streaks resemble, dialogues from a play that the cosmos decided not to perform. This leads to a quiet, unsettling possibility. The universe may record its unfinished intentions, and those intentions may shine, even after being erased. The night sky becomes different when one accepts this thought. It becomes deeper, stranger, heavier. Every empty region might be holding a story that never unfolded. Every silent corner might be filled with unrealized futures drifting like pale ghosts. The streaks continue, steady, thin, without origin, without explanation, without a past. There is no conclusion tonight, only the sense that something has begun to reveal itself. Something gentle, something subtle, something that exists only in the space between becoming and vanishing. And as the streaks slip across the darkness like the last breaths of unformed stars, one question rises, soft but impossible to ignore. If light can survive without its star, what else is the universe hiding from us? The answer lies in the next step of the journey, waiting quietly in the region where the light should never have been. In the nights that followed the first unexplained streaks of light, astronomers began to search the catalogs with an intensity usually reserved for emergencies. They expected to find errors, mismatches, technical oversights. Something simple, something human. But instead of clearing the mystery, the catalogs deepened it. Across decades of records, faint traces appeared like distant fingerprints, marks so small, so cautious, that no one had given them meaning before. They were listed in footnotes, tucked away in the margins, considered noise. But now, with new knowledge and sharpened focus, those marks formed a pattern so haunting that it changed the way astronomers looked at the empty sky. They were all the same type of light, all lacking a source, all traveling from regions mapped as perfectly void. Imagine opening a journal you have written throughout your life and discovering that, hidden in the corners of the pages, someone has been leaving small symbols. The symbols change nothing at first glance, but as you follow them chronologically, a shape begins to form, one that has been present all along, waiting for you to finally notice it. That is what these catalog patterns feel like, a quiet presence that has always been there, invisible until the universe decided it was time for us to see. The first astronomer who compiled the list of repeated appearances sat alone in her office long after midnight. She stared at the plotted points until they blurred together. Every instinct told her the pattern should not exist. Light should not arrive without origin. Emptiness should not shine. She tried to explain it to her colleagues the next morning, but words faltered. How does one describe the impossible with the language of the possible? And yet the data remained, unmoved, unshaken, honest. The streaks were real, and the sky that birthed them was empty. Some of the earliest observations were almost too subtle to notice. A single line of brightness lasting a fraction of a second, fading before the observer could blink. Others lasted longer, drifting slowly as though searching for a place to belong. But even the longest streaks never revealed a source. It was like watching the reflection of a flame that has no candle. As researchers compared spectral readings, one unsettling detail emerged. The streaks carried signatures similar to afterglows. Not the afterglow of gamma bursts or collapsing stars, but something stranger. Their structure resembled the lingering light that remains when the core of a star begins to stir, when fusion is still a dream forming inside the heart of an unborn sun. A glow meant for a future that never arrived. But without a star to form it, that glow became a misplaced remnant, a whisper torn from an unrealized timeline. This is where the first wave of unease swept through the astrophysics community. If these lights were afterglows, they should correspond to the death or birth of a star. But every search for remnants returned nothing. No dust clouds, no echoes, no gravitational shadows. Space remained perfectly unchanged. A stage without actors, yet somehow filled with applause. A few scientists wondered if the catalogs themselves were flawed, but when they ran new scans, using newer instruments, the streaks appeared again precise, unchanged, identical to the ones recorded 10, 20, 40 years ago. The universe was repeating something with a consistency that bordered on intention. The silence around the phenomenon became heavier. There is something deeply disturbing about recognizing a pattern in a place designed to hold nothing. A desert of pure emptiness should remain unchanging, but this desert glittered with trails that refused to justify their existence. And so, astronomers began to ask questions that did not feel comfortable, questions that made the room colder, questions that changed the way they breathed. What if these lights are not afterglows in the traditional sense? What if they are the shadows of events that almost happened? Imagine a star forming deep within a cloud of gas. Imagine its core contracting, tightening, aligning itself with the laws of creation. Imagine the heat building, the threshold approaching, and imagine that, just before ignition, the entire structure collapses into nothing. A star erased from the script before it speaks its first line. What remains? If the universe wastes nothing, if every intention leaves a mark, then perhaps a thin streak of light escapes the collapse, slipping out like the last sigh of a singer who never stepped onto the stage. These thoughts, once unthinkable, began to appear in quiet discussions, in conference rooms with lights dimmed, in observatories late at night, in hushed conversations where scientists spoke softly, as if they feared waking something ancient that prefers to sleep. Every new dataset brought the same revelation. The light behaves almost like the beginning of a star, yet something vital is missing. It is incomplete, in a way that feels deliberate, as though the universe created only the outline of a star, then changed its mind. Some of the streaks lasted 3 seconds, others lasted 10. Some had color signatures leaning toward the reds of cooler stars, while others hinted at the warmer tones of stars like our Sunday. But none of them completed the spectrum. None of them followed the normal evolution of stellar light. They flickered like half-formed thoughts, drifting out of a mind that chose not to remember them. At this stage of the investigation, scientists tried every possible natural explanation. They searched for cold brown dwarfs. They searched for rogue planets. They tracked cosmic rays. They measured dust. They studied scattering patterns. They looked for microlensing events. They checked for interference from solar activity. They rebuilt detectors. They replaced mirrors. They recalibrated entire systems. Nothing matched. Nothing explained the purity of the streaks. Nothing justified the empty regions they came from. The deeper they looked, the more the mystery expanded, like ink spreading through paper. A turning point came when an astronomer plotted the streaks from different decades onto a single star map. Each line pointed toward a region of space that had once been predicted to form stars billions of years ago. But in those regions, the clouds dissipated. The cores dissolved. The process halted before birth. It was as if the universe prepared the nursery, arranged the cradle, dimmed the lights, and then extinguished the possibility entirely. But the light remained, a remnant without a parent, a soul without a body. Some philosophers of science suggested that the universe might preserve the traces of unrealized possibilities. They compared it to a dream that leaves a feeling even after fading, a book that leaves an imprint on the table after being removed, a presence that lingers long after the event is gone. But here, the event never occurred in the first place. This idea introduced a quiet horror, a memory of something that never lived, should not shine, and yet it does. These lights, fragile and thin, travel across billions of kilometers, untouched by time, untouched by matter, untouched by the forces that shape real stars. They glide through the void like ghosts, carrying messages no one asked for, messages written by futures that disappeared before they began. A mystery like this draws the mind inward. It forces a stillness, a contemplative silence. Astronomers began to wonder whether they were observing something deeper than physics, something older, something beneath the fabric of the universe, like veins beneath skin. Because if the universe contains traces of things that did not occur, then what does that say about reality itself? What does it say about the boundary between existence and non-existence? And what does it mean that these streaks are becoming more frequent? This question rose when 3 observatories recorded multiple streaks within the same week. Then the same night, then the same hour, as if the phenomenon was growing bolder, less shy, more willing to reveal itself. Some streaks arrived not alone, but in clusters sliding across space like a constellation that almost existed, but collapsed into pure light instead of matter. Clusters suggest pattern. Pattern suggests process. Process suggests intention. The idea that the universe might have intentions unsettled even the calmest minds. Yet the streaks continued, indifferent to our confusion. They traveled through darkness on paths that made no sense. They passed near galaxies without bending. They crossed gravitational fields without acknowledging them. They behaved like visitors from a realm where gravity and time were written differently. A realm where stars can almost form and still leave a trace, even if the universe changes its mind. With each streak, the catalogs grew thicker. The lines on the maps grew denser, and the skies we thought we understood grew stranger. What was once dismissed as noise became a language, a quiet, shimmering language spoken in the vocabulary of light. a language written by things that never came to be. Before the chapter closes, the sky offers one more quiet provocation. On a night of perfect clarity, a single streak appears brighter than any before it. Not brilliant, not violent, but undeniably confident. It travels slowly, almost gracefully, as if aware of the eyes watching it. Its spectrum carries the shape of a star that would have been massive, luminous, magnificent, if it had ever existed. But the data shows nothing behind it, nothing around it, nothing beneath it, just emptiness, and a line of light drawn by a ghost. It fades with unusual calm, as if it is not disappearing, but returning to a place we cannot follow. And as the instruments fall silent again, one question hangs in the cold air, heavier than all the others. If these lights are the echoes of stars that never lived, what erased the futures that should have created them? That question opens quietly into the darkness, leading us step by step toward the next chapter, where the conflict deepens into something far stranger than absence. The more astronomers searched for answers, the more the silence of the universe seemed to grow, as if the cosmos itself was waiting to see whether humanity would understand what it had revealed. The streaks of light had been catalogued, plotted, measured, compared, and re-examined until every known explanation collapsed under the weight of their consistency. And yet, the emptiness behind them remained untouched. It was around this time that researchers began to notice something far more troubling than the absence of stars. The regions from which the streaks originated were not merely empty, they were too empty. They lacked the fluctuations normally found even in the quietest corners of space. There was no dust to scatter light, no gas to absorb it, no drifting particles to distort it. The darkness felt sterilized, as if something had swept through those regions and removed every trace of matter that might have interfered with the passing of the streaks. This purity raised a new question, one far more unsettling than the last. What if the emptiness is intentional? The universe rarely creates perfect nothingness. Even the vastest voids contain whispers of ancient material, the faint debris of cosmic processes. But these regions were different. They were like carved-out pockets of non-existence, crafted with a precision that defied randomness. When telescopes zoomed into them, they captured a silence so absolute that it felt unnatural. One astronomer described it quietly during a late-night session. It feels as if something made room for the light. And with that thought, the mystery deepened. If something made room, what was removed? If something cleared the space, where did it go? If nothing truly remains empty in the universe, then who or what maintains these voids? The team studying the phenomenon split into two schools of thought. One believed that these empty regions were artifacts of some unknown cosmic process, a cleansing mechanism that preceded the formation of certain structures. The other group suspected something far stranger, that these voids were not natural at all, but the result of events that almost occurred, events that were halted before they had the chance to leave any trace behind. In other words, these empty regions might be the graves of possibilities. Imagine a star preparing to form, gathering matter, shaping its own destiny. Imagine the cloud around it collapsing inward, tightening with the pressure of what is to come. And then imagine that something intervenes, not violently, not dramatically, but with a quiet, decisive action that halts the entire process. A silent cancellation. The cloud dissipates. The core falls apart. The temperature drops. The structure that might have become a star evaporates into nothing, and in its place remains a perfect void, an emptiness shaped by the absence of what never lived. But what about the light? This is where the paradox becomes almost unbearable. Because if the star never formed, if the cloud never ignited, if the process was cancelled before it could complete itself, then where does the light come from? How does the universe release a glow crafted by something that never existed? One proposal emerged that hovered between physics and philosophy, a bridge no scientist crosses lightly. They called it the unrealized emission hypothesis. It suggested that, during the second before collapse, the core of a potential star might reach a threshold where the first breath of light almost escapes. Even if the star never ignites, the momentum of that nearly born glow might slip free, like a whisper escaping the lips of someone who never spoke. A breath without a body, a voice without a speaker, a light without a star. And if this were true, then these streaks were not traces of events that happened, but traces of events that failed to happen. Light from a future that was erased. Though the idea felt unnervingly poetic, the data kept aligning with it. The spectral structure of the streaks matched no known process, but strongly resembled the initial moments of stellar ignition, moments that should have been impossible for these regions. The color, the purity, the curvature of the wavelengths were all consistent with first light, not last light. These were not afterglows, they were before glows, and yet there was no star. There had never been a star. The universe had prepared for one, but abandoned the plan. This led scientists toward a darker question. If something is stopping stars from forming, what force is powerful enough to cancel existence itself? The next layer of confusion came when gravitational scans were conducted over the empty regions. Normally, even the remnants of collapsed material leave signatures, small distortions, gravitational echoes, faint ripples where mass once gathered. But these regions had none. They were smooth, flat, untouched. It was as if the very idea of mass had been erased from them. One researcher compared the scans to the surface of a perfectly still lake. Another said it resembled a clean slate. A third whispered that it looked like a decision. What kind of decision? No one dared answer. The deeper the investigation went, the more impossible the phenomenon became. Not only was the light without origin, but the space surrounding it seemed sculpted to emphasize that lack of origin. It was as if the universe was trying to draw attention to these streaks, marking them with clarity, isolating them from noise, ensuring that no one could mistake their nature. Or perhaps the void is not created for clarity. Perhaps the void is all that remains after possibility collapses. The more the scientists studied, the more they realized something chilling. The streaks appeared to follow consistent intervals. They arrived with a rhythm, a faint, celestial pulse, not random, not chaotic. Something in the universe was repeating the same failure, producing the same, almost born lights, across billions of years and across regions separated by impossible distances. A repetition suggests a mechanism suggests a rule suggests a deeper structure beneath reality as we know it. Could stars fail to exist according to some cosmic cycle? Could the universe be pruning its possibilities? Could the streaks be the remnants of stars that almost belong to a timeline different from ours? One theoretical physicist suggested that the streaks might be echoes from unrealized branches of space-time. When a potential future collapses, its residue might drift into the primary timeline. These residues could appear as light, clean, unbound, unanchored, light without mass, light without history, light without gravity, light from futures that never happened. Most scientists rejected the idea immediately, but the more they rejected it, the more the streaks continued to defy everything else. Every known explanation fell apart one by one, leaving only the possibilities that made the mind tremble. There was one night, however, when a new observation shifted the entire discussion. It happened at a mountain observatory, where the night was clear, the air was thin, and the sky was brutally sharp. A researcher was monitoring a region known for frequent streaks, but instead of the usual single line, 3 streaks appeared simultaneously parallel, equal in length, identical in color. It was as if 3 stars had almost lived in the same moment. 3 futures erased at once. The symmetry was too elegant to ignore, too coordinated, too careful. Nature does not craft perfect parallelism without reason. The researcher later described the scene in her notes, though she never shared it publicly. It felt like watching the ghosts of 3 stars walking beside one another. Those words, though poetic, captured something essential. The streaks do not behave like light from explosions. They do not behave like the debris of birth. They behave like memories of something that never survived the thought of itself. And so the astronomers began to ask a darker question still. What if these streaks are not being created? What if they are being revealed? As if the universe holds layers of unrealized events beneath its surface, and occasionally, those layers shine through. This revelation opened a door that science had hoped would remain closed. The door to the idea that existence might not be binary. Things might not simply exist or not exist. They might hover in between, half-formed, half-erased, half-possible. And when they dissolve, their light remains. A light that travels across the cosmos, seeking a place where its existence makes sense. A light that lands in our telescopes like a message written in a language older than time. A light that belongs to a star that never lived. As Chapter 3 draws toward its own quiet edge, one last detail emerges, soft, subtle, but impossible to ignore. When the 3 parallel streaks were examined later, scientists noticed that the region they came from was not just empty, it was expanding slightly faster than the surrounding space, as if the collapse of unrealized stars had stretched the fabric, leaving behind a scar that continued to widen. A scar on reality. A scar left by something that never happened. A scar glowing with a light that does not belong here. And the question rises, slow and heavy. If a star can leave behind a scar without ever forming, what else in the universe can imprint itself upon existence without ever being real? The answer waits quietly at the threshold of the next chapter, where the structure of space-time itself begins to tremble in ways we have never measured before. As the investigations deepened, astronomers began turning their attention not only to the streaks themselves, but to the regions around them. It was here, in the darkness that should have been untouched, that something even stranger began to reveal itself. The empty zones were not as motionless as they first appeared. They were trembling not visibly, not violently, but with a subtle distortion that instruments could sense like fingertips feeling the thinnest crack in glass. For decades, space had been viewed as a steady canvas, a smooth expanse where matter drifts, light travels, and gravity shapes the grand movements. But these regions resisted that calmness. When measured carefully, their boundaries appeared slightly warped, as though the fabric of space-time had endured a momentary strain. Not enough to tear, not enough to break, but enough to leave a mark. These marks were faint. They were symmetrical in places where symmetry should not exist. They were uneven in places where the cosmos favors smoothness. Most unsettling of all, they seemed to align with the origin points of the light streaks. At first, the distortions were dismissed as measurement errors, flaws in calibration, atmospheric interference. But as multiple observatories confirmed the same anomalies with consistent precision, the excuses dissolved. The distortions were real, and the idea began to form that the streaks of light were not isolated events, they were symptoms of something deeper, something older, something written into the structure of reality itself. One researcher described the distortions as faint bruises on space-time. Another called them echo lines. A third, choosing her words more carefully, said they felt like scratches left by something passing between worlds. The metaphor lingered. A scratch in space-time, a faint tear, a place where the light of an unrealized star could slip through. This was not a concept the scientific community accepted easily. The idea that space-time could bear scars from events that never occurred walked the line between physics and myth. But the instruments did not care about beliefs, they recorded what they recorded, indifferent to human comfort. And what they showed was this. The regions behind the streaks possessed tiny fluctuations in density, temperature, and curvature fluctuations, too small for the eye, but too precise to be ignored. Imagine pressing a finger gently against a sheet of paper. You would not tear it. You might not wrinkle it. But afterward, the fibers would remember the pressure for a moment. The universe seemed to be showing those same kinds of subtle memories, impressions of something that almost pressed through. But what was pressing? What force could lean against the boundary of reality, fail to pass through, yet still leave behind light? Another theory took shape, one that unsettled even those who proposed it. The idea suggested that the fabric of space-time is layered, like the grain of wood, and in rare circumstances, those grains slip or slide or misalign, creating microscopic seams. Through these seams, possibilities that were never realized might drift long enough to release a flicker of the light they almost held. Not light from a star, not light from an explosion, but light from a glimpse of existence, caught between becoming and vanishing. A seam between realities, a momentary slit through which possibility breathes. Some theorists argued that these seams were unavoidable byproducts of quantum fluctuations magnified across cosmic distances. Others whispered that they might be clues to a larger structure, a deeper architecture beneath the universe we see, where countless unrealized events press against the boundary like shadows begging for form. The notion felt impossible, and yet the streaks continued. Precise, quiet, delicate, each one tracing the path of something that never fully entered our universe. A team studying these distortions decided to visualize them. They gathered data from 12 independent observatories and overlaid the results onto a single map. What emerged was a pattern far more intricate than expected. Not random scratches, not chaotic fluctuations, but lines curved, elegant, deliberately spaced, as though an invisible hand had drawn them. They resembled the marks left behind when a pen scratches paper lightly enough not to leave ink, but hard enough to imprint the surface. These lines formed arcs. The arcs formed loops. The loops formed shapes eerily similar to the gravitational pathways a star would have created, if the star had ever existed. The universe was holding the outline of something that should have been, but outlines do not shine on their own. They need a spark. They need intention. They need the ghost of a process. And that is when researchers realized something even more stunning. The distortions were strongest when the streaks appeared, then slowly faded as the streaks passed. It was not that the streaks were crossing through smooth space. It was that the streaks were revealing imperfections that usually remain hidden, like sunlight glancing across the fine marks on a piece of metal. The streaks lit up the scars of events that had never taken place. One astronomer recorded in his notebook a private note never meant for publication. It feels as though the universe is full of erased stars, and these are their shadows. He later crossed out the line, but others who studied the phenomenon felt the same quiet realization. Perhaps the streaks were the only visible reminders of an entire population of stars the universe once considered, then abandoned. This idea was alarming not because it was strange, but because it implied a kind of cosmic selectiveness, a decision-making process that filtered realities, allowing some stars to form while suppressing others before they took shape. If unrealized stars leave light, what else might leave traces? If canceled futures shine, what does that say about the nature of time? The deeper the questions went, the more the air in the observatories seemed to change. Late at night, when the halls were empty and the machines hummed like distant insects, the researchers felt as though they were peering into a place they were not meant to see, an underlayer of reality usually sealed away. And then came the discovery that pushed them further into that underlayer. During a routine analysis, a researcher noticed a strange alignment between several distorted regions. When plotted together, they formed a sweeping curve, a gentle arc shaped like the beginning of a spiral. It was faint, nearly invisible, but unmistakably intentional looking. Spirals in nature are rarely accidents. They are the signatures of growth, motion, evolution. But this spiral had no center, no origin, no star to anchor it, only light from stars that never were. If the spiral represented motion, then it was the motion of something unreal. If it represented growth, then it was the growth of something that was aborted before birth. If it represented evolution, then it was the evolution of possibility itself. The idea was dizzying. The universe might be mapping the paths of things that do not exist, and we were watching the map glow. As the data continued to accumulate, the distortions revealed another peculiar property. They were not fixed. They moved. Slowly, gently, like ripples in a pond long after the stone has sunk. This movement suggested that whatever caused the distortions was not a single event, but a continuous process, a rhythm within the fabric of reality, pulsing like a heartbeat. Not the heartbeat of a star, not the heartbeat of a galaxy, but the heartbeat of possibility. Some instruments recorded fluctuations occurring at regular intervals, as if the universe was inhaling and exhaling in the places where unrealized stars pressed against it. If the universe breathes, then what is it breathing in? What is it breathing out? The thought was too large to hold, too heavy to speak aloud. Yet the evidence kept rising, soft but unrelenting. One evening, a team watching a set of known distortion zones saw something they had never seen before. A distortion pulsed, brightening slightly, then dimming, as if struck by an invisible wave. A moment later, a streak of light drifted out of that region, shimmering like a line drawn by a trembling hand. It was the first time a distortion was caught in the act of giving birth to a streak. The team realized, with a chill running through them, that the streaks were not random emissions. They were linked to these trembling seams. The fabric of space-time was moving in ways it should not move, and with each movement, a trace of unrealized existence slipped free. A ghost of a star that never lived, a glimmer from a moment that never happened, a whisper from the underside of reality. The more they watched, the clearer the connection became. The distortions seemed to thicken before each appearance, as if gathering strength or perhaps resisting a pressure. The streaks emerged only when the tension reached a threshold. It was as though something was pushing from underneath, and space-time could not hold it entirely. A pressure of possibility, a pressure of futures collapsing, a pressure of what almost formed. But the deeper implication was far more profound. If space-time can buckle under the weight of unrealized events, then perhaps the universe is filled with things that almost exist, and some of them are trying to touch the world we know. This idea did not sit comfortably with anyone, not because it was frightening, but because it felt true. When the chapter drifts toward its ending, the sky offers a final hint. In one of the largest distortion zones, a faint pattern begins to form. At first it resembles static, then a woven texture, then a shape too subtle to describe but too precise to dismiss. It looks like a star's silhouette, not a living star, not a dead star, but the outline of a star that never stepped into existence. And as the faint geometry dissolves back into darkness, one question rises softly, almost tenderly. If the universe carries the scars of stars that never lived, what will we find when we look deeper into the cracks? The answer waits quietly ahead, in the place where the unreal begins to resemble the real, and where the next chapter opens. As the distortions continued to reveal their delicate marks across the silent territories of the sky, astronomers found themselves returning to a single, haunting realization. The faint scars they recorded were not interruptions in space-time caused by random forces or by ancient collisions. They did not resemble the aftermath of meteoric destruction, nor the faint echoes of black hole influence. Instead, they felt like the residual impressions of something trying to exist, something that pressed against the boundary of reality, and then disappeared. The universe bore the memory of the attempt, and the streaks of light, those trembling lines across the void, seemed to be the remnants of that effort. Researchers began examining the distortions not as isolated anomalies, but as part of a larger landscape, a topography of almost events mapped across the cosmos. This idea, once spoken only in whispers, had now become a central point of study. Teams traced the distortions with the same intensity that archaeologists might trace the faint carvings of civilizations long lost. Each mark suggested a story that had never been lived, a narrative that had dissolved before it found its voice. Across months of careful observation, a pattern emerged, subtle but unmistakable. The distortions aligned with regions once predicted to form stars, as if space-time itself had prepared the stage for creation, only to erase it at the last moment. These erased stages were not random. They appeared in clusters, in pathways, in arcs of potential that reached across billions of kilometers. It was as if the universe had once envisioned constellations of stars that would never shine. Where those constellations should have been born, there were only spaces smooth, silent, almost reverent in their emptiness. And from those spaces drifted the faintest lines of light, as if the ghosts of the unborn stars were searching for a place to belong. One particular region became the focus of deeper study. It was a vast hollow stretching across a corner of the sky that astronomers once believed held enormous potential for stellar formation. Decades ago, simulations predicted clusters of massive stars developing there, woven together into a brilliant tapestry of creation. But the clouds had dissolved before they ignited. The cores had scattered, and the bright future once forecasted never came to be. Yet now, under the scrutiny of high-resolution instruments, the region glowed with faint distortions that curved gently, like impressions left by hands pressing softly against a curtain. The distortions, formed a pattern that resembled the structure of a star cluster. The arrangement of mass that should have gathered, the currents that should have flowed, the gravitational wells that should have deepened, but the pattern was incomplete, broken, missing its substance. All that remained were the lines, the skeletal traces of futures that had been withdrawn. And then, from that region, a streak of light emerged. Thin, steady, unmistakably deliberate. The researchers watched in silence as the streak drifted across the detectors, tracing a path that matched a predicted orbital motion of one of the stars that never existed. It was the outline of a life that had not been allowed to happen. The deeper implications of this were difficult even to articulate. If the universe could bear the memory of a star that never lived, then perhaps the cosmos was far more aware of its own possibilities than anyone had ever assumed. Perhaps the universe dreams. Perhaps it remembers its dreams. And perhaps some dreams leave behind a glow. In long, quiet discussions beneath dim lights, scientists spoke about these distortions the way historians speak about forbidden chapters. Chapters torn from a book, yet somehow still leaving a faint tag, a crease, a shadow on the page. If these distortions were scars, then they were scars left by futures erased before they took shape. If they were seams, then they were seams between what nearly existed and what ultimately did not. One physicist described them as fragile windows into a version of reality that never fully aligned with ours. Another spoke about them as the breath of unrealized timelines. A third murmured the most poetic explanation. It is the universe grieving the things it decided not to create. The streaks of light became more heartbreaking under this interpretation. They were not emissions. They were memories. Fragments. Gentle reminders of a star's first moment, the moment when its core begins to tighten with potential and the first flicker of radiance stirs within it. But, in these cases, that moment was only a tremor, a pulse, a momentary pressure against the boundary of existence, barely enough to release a trace of brightness into the dark. The researchers began looking at the distortions with new eyes. Previously, they searched for equations. Now, they searched for signs of longing. The longing of matter that nearly assembled. The longing of a future that almost took shape. If space-time holds memory, then the universe is filled with the memories of things it never allowed to be real. This thought transformed the distortions from anomalies into stories. Not stories with beginnings and endings, but stories with only one moment, the moment of almost. And in that moment, light found a way to escape. Imagine a star forming within a thick cloud of matter. As gravity pulls inward, the cloud tightens, pressing the core into a density capable of igniting. But before ignition occurs, a slight shift in the surrounding forces destabilizes the entire structure. Instead of collapsing into fusion, the cloud collapses into silence. No explosion, no flash, no legacy. And yet, in that last breath before potential collapses, something happens. A trembling, a ripple, a faint shimmer, a whisper of radiance squeezing through a seam too small for anything else to pass. The light that escapes is not the light of a star. It is the light of what the star would have been. The concept felt almost sacred, almost forbidden, because it meant that existence is not simply about what forms and what does not. It is about what tries to form, what almost becomes, what presses against the veil of reality with enough yearning to leave behind a trace. The more scientists studied this idea, the more they realized that the distortions were not only marks from unrealized stars, they were marks from unrealized time. These regions did not simply lack matter. They lacked histories. They lacked the gravitational narratives that accompany star formation. They lacked the residues of cosmic events. It was as if time had skipped these locations entirely. Space-time had written nothing there, and instead of leaving blankness, it left scars, places where potential futures rubbed against the boundary before slipping away. One evening, after months of studying these marks, a group of astronomers gathered outside the observatory. The air was cold. The night was clear. The sky stretched above them like a vast, open question. They looked up at the stars that had managed to form, the stars permitted to burn, and then toward the dark regions where the streaks appeared. Someone whispered, "How many stars are missing from the sky?" How many were meant to exist but did not survive the thought of themselves? No one answered. The silence was answer enough. As the night continued, an unexpected event occurred. A distortion zone that had been monitored for weeks began to shift. The subtle tremble intensified. Instruments recorded small temperature fluctuations. The curvature deepened by a measurable amount. And then, slowly, a faint silhouette emerged within the distortion. A shape so fragile, it seemed afraid to be seen. The silhouette resembled the shell of a star, not solid, not complete. A hollow geometry, like the skeletal frame of a lantern. The kind of outline one might see when light passes through a mold that was never filled. Then, with a soft glimmer, the silhouette dissolved and a streak of light drifted away. This was not the birth of a star. It was the echo of a star's possibility. A moment later, the distortion faded back into stillness. Researchers realized they had not witnessed an event. They had witnessed an attempt. Something had pressed against the boundary of existence hard enough to shape an outline. And when that outline collapsed, it released its only trace into the universe. A ghost of a future, a ghost made of light. As the chapter finds its final breath, the night offers one more quiet question. A question that opens like a doorway to the next stage of wonder. If a star can carve its outline into space-time without ever igniting, then what happens when entire regions of the universe carry the shapes of things that never had the chance to exist? The answer waits gently ahead, in the next chapter, where the light no longer comes only from what almost formed, but from what might be pressing through from beyond our reality. The idea that space-time might contain the outlines of unrealized stars was unsettling enough. But as astronomers continued their patient study of the distortion zones, another possibility emerged quietly at first, like a hesitant thought drifting into focus. Some of the distortions behaved in ways that no local phenomenon could explain. They appeared and vanished too abruptly. They carried energy profiles inconsistent with the surrounding vacuum. They warped just slightly off-axis, as if responding to a pressure that did not exist within our universe. Slowly, reluctantly, the scientists began to whisper about something they never imagined they would consider. Perhaps the streaks of light were not merely remnants of unrealized stars. Perhaps they were visitors. Not visitors in the sense of conscious beings or structures, but visitors in the form of radiance. Light that was not born here? Light that slipped across a boundary we do not yet understand? Light made of laws that do not fully match our own. It was an idea as fragile as the streaks themselves. But every new observation strengthened it. One evening, a research team monitoring a distortion zone recorded a faint shimmer before a streak emerged. The shimmer lasted less than a second, but instruments captured its signature. It was unlike any known interaction of matter or energy. It resembled a fold, a crease, a brief misalignment between the fabric of space we inhabit and something just beyond it. A doorway that opened for a heartbeat. A seam that parted, then sealed again. And through that seam slipped a line of light, thin, trembling, impossibly clean. The researchers replayed the data again and again, but there was no denying it. What they were witnessing was not merely the collapse of potential. It was a crossing. Something from outside the boundary of our universe had passed through. This idea did not frighten them. It humbled them. The universe had always seemed vast enough on its own, a boundless ocean stretching into unimaginable distances. But now, the faint, trembling distortions suggested that even this ocean might be only a single drop in a far greater sea. A sea layered with countless other realities adjacent, silent, brushing against ours with pressures too subtle to perceive. Some theorists had long described these realities as bubbles in a foam of existence, each expanding on its own timeline, separated by thin walls of space-time. They believed that under certain conditions, these bubbles might collide, merge, or overlap. But until now, nothing had ever suggested that light, pure, delicate light could slip between them. Yet here was evidence. Faint, soft, but undeniable. One physicist described the phenomenon as a thread pulled through a fabric by a needle from another room. Another likened it to breathing through a wall so thin that, occasionally, a molecule slips through, But the metaphor that captured the hearts of those who studied the streaks was the simplest one of all: a pinhole in reality, just large enough for light to pass. If this interpretation was correct, then the streaks did not belong to our universe at all. They belonged to something adjacent. Perhaps a universe where the stars that failed here succeeded. Perhaps a universe where possibilities unfolded differently. Perhaps a universe where the ghosts of our unrealized stars lived full, burning lives. One theoretical astrophysicist suggested that each streak might be the shadow of a star shining in a neighboring domain, its radiance passing through a microscopic breach in the boundary between worlds. If so, the distortions might be the marks left behind by the contact between universes, like fingerprints pressed gently against a shared window pane. But if that was the case, then why were the streaks so faint? Why were they so thin? Why so delicate? The answer came from comparing their spectra to known stellar emissions. The streaks lacked the full complexity of real starlight. They were incomplete not because they came from our unrealized futures, but because they were filtered by the boundary itself. The breach, the pinhole, reduced them. As water passing through cloth emerges as mist, light passing between universes appears as threads. This interpretation would explain why the streaks are so pure, why they carry almost no interference, why they glide through gravitational fields untouched. They are not fully here. They are only passing through. One quiet night in the observatory, a researcher said softly, "It is like seeing a candle flame through a keyhole. You know the flame is real, but you can never see the candle." The metaphor lingered in the minds of everyone in the room. It felt too fitting to ignore. As the studies progressed, new behaviors surfaced. Some streaks appeared to retreat slightly, pulling back, as though drifting toward a pressure on the far side of the boundary. Others curved in ways that defied the geometry of our universe, as if being tugged by forces originating elsewhere. The more astronomers observed, the more they began to suspect that these streaks had trajectories not aligned with any known path of light. They did not radiate outward from explosions. They did not orbit. They did not scatter. They moved as though following a logic foreign to our space-time, a logic inherited from the place they came from. This realization raised a new and profound question. If the streaks come from another universe, what conditions on the other side allow them to form? And more importantly, why does the breach allow only light to pass? Why not matter? Why not gravitational influence? Why not the entire star? The silence that followed this question hung like a weight in the room. Light is the gentlest traveler of the cosmos. It needs no mass. It leaves no footprint. It slips through cracks that matter cannot penetrate. If reality has pinholes, then perhaps only light is delicate enough to pass through them. This idea eventually shaped an entirely new line of inquiry. Researchers mapped the distortion zones not as scars from unrealized futures, but as intersections, points where the boundary between universes thins, wavers, ripples, not tears, not fractures, simply thin places. Places where the veil is worn, perhaps from pressure, perhaps from coincidence, perhaps from cosmic architecture we have only begun to imagine. The streaks, then, were not merely memories. They were travelers, wandering emissaries of distant realms. Astronomers began analyzing the distortions more carefully, looking for signs of periodicity. To their astonishment, many distortion zones pulsed not randomly, but rhythmically. The pulses were slow, spaced across weeks or months, but they repeated with astonishing accuracy. It resembled breathing, not the breathing of living things, but the breathing of structures, the expansions and contractions of a boundary responding to forces beyond our comprehension. Each pulse was followed, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, by the emergence of a streak of light. It was as though the boundary inhaled, thinned, and exhaled light. The image was almost sacred. The universe breathing the radiance of another existence into ours, just enough to let us know we are not alone in the vast foam of creation. One researcher, in a moment of quiet awe, whispered, "What if we are not seeing stars that failed here, but stars that succeeded elsewhere?" She continued, "What if these streaks are the echoes of triumphs we never witnessed? Stars that lived in another universe, shining through the smallest imperfections in the wall between our worlds. no one dismissed her. The room remained still for a long time, because for the first time, that explanation felt as plausible as any physics could allow. In the nights that followed, more streaks appeared. They came from zones where distortions pulsed faster than before. Some streaks overlapped, weaving through one another like threads drawn from neighboring fabrics. One particularly striking streak bent at a slight angle, as if resisting a pull from the place it came from, an invisible tug across universes. The instruments captured every detail. The light shifted in color as it passed, as if being stretched between realities. It was a soft, sorrowful shift, the kind one might feel when leaving home for a place where the rules are different. The astronomers watching felt an unexpected sense of longing. The streak seemed to yearn, not for our world, not to be observed, but simply to exist, to complete its journey, to be whole again. But it could not, because it did not belong here. As months passed, the distortion zones revealed one more profound characteristic. They were not random across the sky. When mapped on a cosmic scale, they formed a pattern of broad arcs sketched across the heavens, curving gently, subtly, magnificently. Not a spiral this time, not an outline of a cluster, but a boundary. It was as though another universe was brushing against ours along a great, sweeping contact surface, like two immense bubbles kissing in the darkness. And the streaks were the faint threads passing through the tiny spaces between them. Thin spaces, soft openings, pinhole bridges between worlds. The chapter drifts toward its quiet horizon with one final observation, a detail so soft, so indirect, that it was almost missed. During a high-sensitivity scan, one distortion zone flickered with a pattern that did not match any known physical process. The flicker was rhythmic, intricate, ordered. It was not a code, not a signal, not a message. It was simply the oscillation of a star that did not exist here. Its heartbeat was crossing the boundary. One astronomer trembled as he whispered, "We are listening to the pulse of a star that lives in another universe." The streak that emerged moments later shimmered with a brightness unlike any seen before, as if carrying the distant echo of that heartbeat. It drifted across the sky like a sigh from a world beyond our own. And as the streak faded, a single question rose softly, opening the path into the next chapter. If light can cross the boundary between universes, what happens when the boundary begins to thin further? The answer waits just ahead, in the quiet territory where the universe begins to remember, not only the stars it lost, but the ones shining just beyond its walls. The idea that the streaks of light came through microscopic seams between universes did not settle easily. It hung in the air like a delicate vibration, as though the very notion resonated with something deeper than scientific theory. The more astronomers studied these thin places, the soft boundaries where light trembled into our world, the more they sensed that the phenomenon was not random. It followed a rhythm too consistent, too careful, too quiet to be coincidence. And soon, a new layer of strangeness began to reveal itself. The streaks of light, once thought to be mere threads slipping through the cosmic veil, carried faint patterns that resembled the earliest signals of stellar formation. Not the formation within our universe, but from something adjacent, something touching us like a whisper against the skin. At first, these patterns appeared as slight shifts in color, brief fluctuations in brightness, or gentle deviations in trajectory. But as the instruments improved, the signals grew clearer. The streaks pulsed with a subtle cadence that mimicked the interior behavior of an igniting star. Not our stars, not any stars cataloged in known astrophysics, but stars shaped by rules we did not yet recognize. It was as if each streak was the faint shadow of a heartbeat, the soft, rhythmic breath of an existence on the other side of reality. One astronomer placed the data side by side with known stellar oscillations. The resonance did not match any type of star in our universe, but it matched something else, something predicted by models of alternate cosmological structures. Stars built from different fundamental balances, governed by slightly altered constants, shaped by a geometry that allowed different harmonies of fusion. In these alternate models, stars could ignite differently. They could pulse differently. They could shine differently. And their light thin, filtered, trembling from the pressure of crossing universes, could resemble the fragile streaks seen in our sky. The discovery changed the nature of the conversation. It was no longer a question of whether the streaks were real. It was no longer a question of whether they came from within our universe. It became a question of what kind of universe could produce such gentle, ghost-like radiance. The answer unfolded slowly, like a page turning in a quiet room. The patterns in the streaks indicated a realm with slightly softer physical constraints, a place where matter could remain stable at densities impossible here. A place where space-time bent more easily, like cloth instead of steel. A place where the formation of stars might involve oscillations too delicate for our universe to support. If this interpretation was correct, then the streaks were not the remnants of failed stars, they were the shadows of stars that thrived elsewhere. Stars burning in a universe whose rules allowed them to pulse like music. Some researchers began to speak of these lights not as ghosts, but as songs, melodies born beyond our cosmic wall, slipping into our reality like faint echoes from a distant shore. The idea felt unreal, and yet utterly natural. Light, after all, has always been the universe's softest traveler, a wanderer respectful enough to pass gently where matter cannot go. One researcher even proposed that these streaks were not accidental leaks, but rather the inevitable consequence of two universes brushing against each other. She described it like the brief meeting of two oceans, where currents mingled just enough to exchange particles, scents, and traces of distant life. In this analogy, the streaks were not invasions. They were exchanges, small gifts passed through a boundary that occasionally thins. Perhaps our universe, rigid and structured, allowed only the faintest glimpses of neighboring realities. Perhaps theirs, softer and more fluid, allowed light to slip away with ease. But why now? Why these moments? Why these regions? The answer began to take shape in the data. A pattern of distortion regions tracing a vast, sweeping arc across our sky. A curve so large that no single telescope could see it all at once. This arc resembled the projected tangent of a boundary, that gentle contact surface between universes described in mathematical models. The streaks appeared at points of slight thinning along this arc, like tiny imperfections along the edge of a bubble where droplets of water might escape. As the boundary pressed closer to our universe, the thin places multiplied. As the thin places multiplied, the streaks appeared more frequently. As the streaks appeared more frequently, the patterns in them grew clearer. It was as if the two universes were moving closer together, touching, brushing, breathing against one another. And in every place where their contact softened the veil, light crossed. Beautiful, strange, almost shy. And yet, the more the boundary thinned, the more the streaks displayed behaviors that defied our expectations. For instance, some streaks curved ever so slightly, as though bending toward a gravitational force that did not exist here. Others shimmered with a faint quiver, like light disturbed by distant waves on a surface we could not see. A few even broke into multiple strands, separating and rejoining as though guided by rules entirely foreign to our space-time. The most startling observation came when a streak entered a region of strong gravitational curvature caused by a distant cluster. Instead of bending inward, as all light in our universe must, it bent outward, softly, impossibly, beautifully, as if following the curvature of its home universe, not ours. The astronomers watching the data stood silent for a long while. In that moment, they understood something profound. The streaks obeyed the laws of their origin, not the laws of their destination. They were visitors, carrying the physics of their world into ours, like travelers walking through unfamiliar terrain by memory of home. This realization made the streaks more than anomalies. It made them ambassadors, messengers bearing the subtle signatures of neighboring creation. The more scientists studied them, the more intimate the connection felt. They were no longer seeing mere threads of light. They were seeing the outermost edges of lives that unfolded where we cannot follow. In one particularly clear observation, a streak flickered in a rhythm that matched the theoretical pulse of a star undergoing slow, stable fusion in a geometry unlike ours. The pattern repeated 4 times before fading, a soft, tender hint that somewhere beyond our cosmic wall, a star beat with a pulse foreign to our physics. It was the first time astronomers felt with absolute certainty that they were listening to the life of a star from another universe. But with this awe came a quiet concern. If the boundary between universes was thinning, what would happen if the thinning continued? Would more light leak through? Would more distortions form? Would entire structures brush against the veil? Or would the boundary eventually seal again, leaving us with only the memory of the moments when we heard the heartbeat of another world? These questions grew heavier as observations multiplied. Some streaks appeared dimmer, as if the journey between universes exhausted them. Others appeared bright, strong, almost eager. A few streaked so slowly that they resembled drifting lanterns carried by a distant wind. It became clear that the boundary was not uniform. It thickened and thinned in waves, in cycles, in breaths, and with each breath, another faint thread of starlight stitched itself into our sky. But the most profound discovery came in the form of a silence. In one distortion zone, one that had been active for weeks, the streaks stopped. The instruments waited. The astronomers waited. The night waited. Nothing. At first, the lack of activity felt like a reprieve. But it soon became clear that something deeper had changed. Measurements showed that the distortion zone was stabilizing. The ripples had flattened. The curvature had smoothed. The seam was closing. The pinhole was healing. And in that stillness, astronomers felt something unexpected, a sense of loss. It was as though a window into another reality had been gently shut, leaving behind only the memory of the light that once passed through. And then the realization followed. If one pinhole could close, others could too. And perhaps, one day, all of them might. Before the chapter drifts toward its quiet conclusion, the universe offers one final detail, a detail so subtle that it could be mistaken for imagination. As one distortion zone began to close, a faint glow shimmered along its boundary, a soft halo, gentle, delicate, like the final breath of a star slipping behind a curtain. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, the astronomers watching felt an indescribable sensation, the sense of something saying farewell. As the glow dissolved into the dark, a single question rose softly, inviting us toward the next chapter. If these lights are the whispers of stars from another universe, what happens when the boundary between worlds trembles again? Not to close, but to open wider? The answer lies ahead, in the place where cosmic memory begins to blur, the line between our universe and the one pressing softly against its edge. With every new streak of impossible light, the idea of borders between universes grew less theoretical and more intimate. What had once been equations on a chalkboard now appeared as trembling threads across the sky, weaving their way through the emptiness with a grace that belonged to neither chance nor chaos. Yet, as astronomers studied these threads, these whispers of distant existence, another idea began to form, as soft as a sigh and as persistent as a heartbeat. Perhaps the universe was not merely allowing light to pass through thin places. Perhaps the universe was remembering. The notion arrived quietly, like a small ripple on a motionless lake. It began with a simple observation. Some streaks of light did not seem to follow the behavior of objects pushed across a boundary. Instead, they behaved like echoes, resonant, repetitive, gently fading. Their energy curves resembled the decay of a memory, not the trajectory of a traveler. Light that forgets itself, light that repeats, light that trails off as if dissolving into recollection. Astronomers began to question whether every streak represented a journey from elsewhere. Maybe some of them were born right here, born not from stars, but from the universe's own attempt to hold on to what it had never allowed to exist. A cosmic memory effect. The deeper this idea took root, the more the data seemed to support it. When researchers examined the faintest streaks, the ones barely strong enough to register, they found an astonishing pattern. These faint streaks aligned with regions that, billions of years ago, held the highest potential for star formation. Regions filled with dense clouds, carbon-rich pockets, gravitational cradles prepared for ignition. Those regions should have produced thousands of stars, but they did not. They collapsed into emptiness long before the first spark. And now, in the present, those same places glimmered with threads of ghostly light, as if time itself refused to forget the future stolen from it. It was a realization that changed everything. Light might not only cross between universes, it might also cross between timelines, between what happened and what could have happened. One physicist, exhausted by sleepless nights of analysis, murmured the idea aloud. The universe remembers everything, even the things it never created. The room fell silent, not because the idea was impossible, but because it felt too natural. Human memory works in a similar way. We remember our choices. We also remember the choices we did not make. We remember the lives we lived and the lives we almost lived. Why should the universe be so different? This thought grew heavier when the researchers studied the distortions surrounding the streaks. Previously, these scars of space-time had been interpreted as signs of crossing marks left behind by the passage of light from another realm. But now, many of the distortions seemed stationary. They did not behave like the residue of movement. They behaved like the imprint of something that had pressed into space-time from within, not from outside. Something that tried to exist. Something that failed. Something that left a mark anyway. The distortions were memories, not of actions, but of intentions. One astronomer described them as creases in the page before the word is written. Another said they feel like footprints left by someone who never arrived. And slowly, a picture formed, one as haunting as the ghost stars themselves. The universe, vast as it is, may not be an impartial stage. It may possess its own form of memory, a deep and quiet record of every possibility that ever brushed against existence. Some physicists called this idea absurd. Others called it poetic. Yet the streaks continued to appear, painting the emptiness with the soft remnants of futures that never happened. The strongest evidence emerged from a series of observations captured during an unusually calm stretch of clear nights. Several streaks appeared in close sequence, each tracing a path almost identical to the last. But when analyzed, their spectral patterns were subtly different. Not enough to mark them as distinct stars, but enough to suggest a kind of decay. As if the universe were repeating a memory, each time fainter, each time more fragile. Like the echo of a voice spoken in a cavern, returning softer with every bounce. The idea grew even more compelling when scientists examined the brightest of these repeated streaks. It had a pulse, a faint, rhythmic flicker nestled within the light curve. The pulse resembled the early oscillations of stellar ignition. It was not alive, but it remembered the moment of becoming alive. The universe held the memory of a birth that never occurred. As this interpretation spread through the scientific community, another layer of understanding emerged. The streaks were not uniform. Some displayed clarity, coherence, and shape as though the memory was fresh. Others drifted loosely, distorted, as if the memory had aged, blurred by the erosion of time. And then came the most astonishing revelation. The memory-like streaks followed no gravitational rules. They bent around nothing. They curved around nothing. They were not pushed by anything. It was as though they were not objects in space. They were impressions, imprints, ghosts of never-born stars moving along the pathways they would have followed. As if space-time was carrying out a motion scripted billions of years ago, performing a play long after its cast had vanished. This raised a profound and unsettling question. If the universe remembers unrealized stars, what else does it remember? Entire galaxies that never formed? Timelines that collapsed during their own conception? Events that flickered for a fraction of a moment before dissolving back into quantum foam? The more astronomers explored this idea, the more they found themselves staring at the night sky in a new way. Every dark region felt heavier, richer, filled with stories that had been erased before they could unfold. The emptiness no longer felt empty. It felt full. Full of echoes, full of memories, full of the quiet weight of abandoned futures. Late one night, after hours of silent study, a researcher whispered to a colleague, "What if memory is the basic fabric of the universe? Not matter, not energy, but memory." The colleague stared at the distant lights, scattered across the dome of the skylights that had survived, lights that had been allowed to burn. And she replied softly, "Then these streaks are the universe remembering the things it lost." The idea was beautiful and heartbreaking, and perhaps truer than any model they had ever built. But if the universe remembers, then through what mechanism does it do so? The answer came from a phenomenon often overlooked in cosmology: the persistence of quantum potential. Every event, before becoming real, exists briefly as a cloud of possibilities. Some collapse into reality, others fade into non-existence. But the universe may not erase them completely. The potentials may leave subtle fingerprints, ripples, scars, light, especially the potentials enormous enough to form stars. The streaks of memory light were the final tremors of those potentials, radiance leaking from the collapse of never-born futures. But the most extraordinary realization surfaced when scientists studied the faint noise surrounding the streaks. Some streaks carried faint waves, so faint they were almost swallowed by static. These waves followed patterns predicted by models of cosmic memory. Waves representing the decay of a possibility, a timeline dissolving into nothing, a story unwritten. It was the first time humanity had seen evidence not only of alternate universes, but of alternate histories. There was a night, quiet and cold, when a cluster of faint streaks drifted across a distortion zone. They moved like a soft tide, arriving one after another, each carrying the imprint of a star that never lived. When the sequence finished, the distortion zone pulsed, one slow, deep shimmer, like an exhale. The researchers watching felt a heaviness settle in their chests. Not fear, not confusion, something gentler, something like grief. It was the grief of the universe itself, not for what has happened, but for what might have happened. Not for lives lived, but for lives almost lived. The streaks that night felt like tears, soft, luminous, falling across the emptiness. When the final streak faded, the instruments captured one more signature: a faint curve in space-time, a tremble, a sigh, as if the universe was closing a memory book. And in the quiet that followed, the researchers understood something they could not yet explain. These lights were not mistakes. They were not noise. They were not intrusions. They were the unspoken archive of creation. The next morning, as the sun rose over the observatory's horizon, one question remained on every mind. A question that pointed directly toward the next chapter. If the universe remembers the stars it never created, does it also remember why it chose not to create them? The answer waits gently in the distance, in the chapter where memory begins to collide with the strange possibility that the universe itself might be shaped by what it has forgotten. In the weeks that followed the discovery of memory-like streaks, the conversation among astronomers shifted again. What had begun as an investigation of ghostly light and then grew into an exploration of cosmic seams and unrealized timelines, now moved into a territory even more delicate, one that no one wished to enter aloud. The data had grown too strange, too ordered, too carefully incomplete. It felt as though the phenomenon was not merely a natural occurrence, but the byproduct of something structural, something woven into the very nature of reality itself. And whenever researchers described these patterns to one another, the same hesitant phrase surfaced, wrapped in discomfort. Perhaps the universe is not malfunctioning. Perhaps it is rendering. Of all the interpretations whispered in quiet rooms, this one felt the most dangerous to articulate. Not because it contradicted physics, but because it went beyond it, reaching into the territory of origins. If the universe was behaving in ways that resembled the behavior of a simulation, then the streaks of unanchored light might not be cosmic memories at all, nor visitors from a neighboring realm. They might be artifacts, stray pixels in a cosmic image, lines drawn on a canvas before the painting is finished, bright mistakes shining where the program faltered. Yet, even those who entertained the idea did so with restraint. They avoided the sensational tone of speculation. They focused instead on the quiet, technical questions. Why did the streaks appear only in certain regions? Why did the distortion seem to follow geometries too clean to be random flaw? Why did the light behave like something rendered rather than emitted? The theory did not claim the universe was artificial. It only suggested that the universe might have layers of process, steps, structures, iterations, a slow, unfolding build of reality's fabric. Just as a drawing begins with thin, rough lines, followed by firmer strokes, followed by color, followed by detail, followed by shadow, the universe might construct itself gradually. If so, the streaks of unformed starlight might be remnants of a stage that was never completed. One physicist studying the phenomenon described it gently as she stared through the observatory window. Perhaps these streaks are the scaffolding, a glimpse of the framework behind the finished surface. Her colleagues did not answer, but none of them dismissed the idea. It was difficult not to notice the similarities between the behavior of the streaks and the behavior of placeholders, those faint shapes that appear in the early stages of a simulation before full detail is applied. The streaks possessed a purity that natural astrophysical processes rarely produce: clean lines, predictable decay, shapes that looked more like outlines than finished objects. And then there were the distortions. The distortions did not match gravitational models. They did not match quantum models. They did not match models of collapsed matter or turbulence. Instead, they resembled artifacts of resolution, tiny inconsistencies that appear when two layers of a structure misalign for a fraction of a second, not flaws. Transitions, as if reality occasionally exposes the space between layers. One of the clearest examples came from a distortion zone observed on a quiet night when the air was still and the sky was free of interference. Instruments recorded a series of tremors in the boundary, a rhythmic, pulsing shimmer. The tremors repeated in perfect intervals, like the beats of a clock. But the intervals did not match any natural cycle of stellar formation or cosmic drift. They matched something else entirely: the timing of a refresh, a reset, a redraw, a recalibration. It was only a metaphor, of course. Space-time does not refresh. Reality does not update. And yet, the patterns fit too precisely to ignore. After each tremor, the distortions sharpened for a moment. The geometry grew clearer. The faint outlines of never-born stars appeared just long enough to see their form. And then the clarity dissolved, leaving behind nothing but darkness. The universe was showing its underlayers, then hiding them again. As the idea spread among researchers, many resisted it, not because of disbelief, but because of reverence. The universe was too vast, too sacred, too ancient to be described in terms of simulation. But as more streaks appeared, each one carrying the same delicate incompleteness, resistance weakened into contemplation. Perhaps the universe was not artificial, but perhaps it was structured, a system, a process, a canvas built in layers. Not the product of a creator in the human sense, but the result of a deeper architecture, the fundamental way in which existence forms itself. Some physicists suggested that if reality is emergent, if it crystallizes out of underlying mathematics or quantum logic, then the streaks might be glimpses of earlier iterations, hints of possibilities the system calculated, but ultimately discarded. Lines from an earlier version of the universe, blueprints of events that did not survive the final selection. And the distortions were the seams where these versions overlapped. A younger researcher, one who had spent years studying computational models of spacetime, spoke with quiet, trembling. It feels like the universe has drafts, and we are seeing the erased lines. The analogy resonated with everyone in the observatory. Drafts, sketches, unfinished pages, but drafts do not vanish cleanly. They leave impressions, indentations, shadows of the pencil strokes. Perhaps the streaks were these shadows, light left behind not by stars that almost existed, but by stars that existed only in the earliest drafts of reality itself. One sequence of streaks strengthened this interpretation. Over a span of 3 nights, 5 streaks appeared in perfect alignment. Their spacing was identical. Their lengths were identical. Their decay curves were identical. Natural processes do not produce such uniformity, but pre-rendered frames layers blinking on and off during construction do. The effect was subtle but unmistakable. It resembled a demonstration, a reminder, a quiet, delicate reveal of structure beneath the surface. The final piece of evidence emerged when astronomers studied the faint noise surrounding the streaks, searching for any signature that could not fit within known physics. After weeks of analysis, one researcher found it a low, repeating pattern hidden in the field around the streaks, too faint for the human eye to detect, too structured to be random. It resembled quantization, tiny jumps in the data, as though space-time itself were discretized in those regions. Not smooth, stepped, layered, like pixels, like tiles, like a grid, not everywhere, only in the thin places, only in the regions where the streaks appeared. It was as if the universe's underlying resolution was exposed when the pressure of unrealized existence pushed against the boundary. A deeper, quieter thought settled across the team. Perhaps the universe is not simulated, but perhaps it is built the way simulations are, from foundation to structure, from structure to form, from form to detail. Perhaps what they were witnessing was not a glitch, but the scaffolding of reality, momentarily revealed by the strain of possibilities collapsing into non-existence. A philosopher of science visiting the observatory put it in softer language. If existence is a work in progress, then these streaks are the sketches left behind by the artist. The idea was comforting in a way, not divine, not technical, simply natural. The universe as a work that grows, learns, iterates, a place where nothing is discarded cleanly, where even abandoned futures shine for a moment before fading. But the most profound moment of the chapter came late one night, when the observatory captured an unusual streak, one unlike any before. It flickered in discrete steps, not smoothly. It moved not as continuous motion, but in tiny increments, almost as if being drawn line by line. A rendering, not of a star, but of the echo of a star. The instruments tracked every tiny pulse. Each pulse was separated by the exact same interval. Each pulse carried the exact same amount of energy. And then, just as the streak reached the edge of the field, it froze. Not faded, not dimmed, froze. For a fraction of a second, the line remained suspended. Still, silent, impossibly static. Then it dissolved. The researchers stared at the blank screen in disbelief. Stars do not freeze. Light does not freeze. Only a rendering process freezes. One of them finally whispered. It was waiting for the next frame. No one argued. But they did not call it a glitch. They did not call it an error. They did not call it a flaw. They called it a reminder that the universe is deeper, stranger, and perhaps more layered than anyone had ever imagined. And as the last numbers settled on the instruments, a new question rose softly, a question that pulled them toward the next chapter. If these streaks are the leftover lines of a universe still refining itself, what will we see when the refinement breaks down and the deeper structure begins to show? The answer lies ahead, in the threshold where space-time begins to lose its smoothness, and the next chapter waits. There comes a moment in every long cosmic investigation when the familiar shapes of understanding begin to dissolve. At first, the dissolution is subtle, a soft blurring at the edges of certainty, a quiet recognition that old ideas are not large enough to hold new truths. But as the streaks of light continued to move across the emptiness, drifting like threads of quiet defiance, the dissolution deepened. For months, astronomers had wondered what these lights were. Now they began to wonder when they were. The question surfaced late one night when a researcher compared time delay measurements of several streaks. Using multiple observatories positioned across Earth, she triangulated the distances as precisely as possible. But when she calculated the arrival time of the photons, the answer refused to make sense. The photons appeared older than the regions they came from, older than the voids they passed through, older than the space surrounding them. Not by millions of years, by something stranger. They appeared to carry a timestamp from a moment that never existed. Not past, not present, not future. Something adjacent to time. Something parallel. Something our universe never lived. She recalculated the numbers again and again, desperate to find an error. But the inconsistency remained delicate, precise, undeniable. The photons bore signs of having traveled across a timeline that had collapsed before it ever intersected ours. Light from a path that reality never followed. As the data spread, other teams began checking their own archives. They discovered the same anomaly hidden in old readings. Faint in older equipment, almost invisible to the naked eye. But with new instruments and new awareness, the signature was unmistakable. The streaks did not belong to our timeline. They carried the memory of a history that never unfolded. At first, the idea felt impossible. Time was supposed to be linear within our universe, a river flowing forward with steadfast direction. It could bend, stretch, ripple, but it could not carry memories of events that never occurred. And yet, here were photons whispering about a moment that had been erased before it was born. It felt as though the light had traveled across the shadow of time. One physicist described it in a trembling whisper as light from a corridor that was sealed before anyone stepped inside. Another said the streaks reminded him of pages removed from a book, yet somehow still drifting through the air. A third offered a more delicate thought. Perhaps the universe rehearses timelines the way a musician rehearses melodies, and these streaks are the notes from a performance that never happened. The metaphor resonated deeply. If the universe ever rehearses its own becoming, if it ever tests the pathways of potential before choosing one, then the streaks might be the remnants of those rehearsals. Not the music itself, but the resonance left in the room after the final note is never played. As astronomers studied the temporal signatures of the streaks, a new pattern emerged. A pattern so subtle it felt like the universe was whispering through a closed door. The timestamps were consistent across streaks from similar regions. They clustered around imaginary moments, moments that did not belong anywhere in our cosmic chronology. These imaginary moments all shared one trait. They were poised at the edge of becoming, just before a star would have ignited, just before a cluster would have gathered, just before a timeline would have crystallized. Moments that leaned forward into existence and then fell backward into silence. The light carried the signature of these almost moments. It carried the breath of aborted time. Researchers began referring to this phenomenon, quietly and reluctantly, as temporal residue. Not because they believed time leaves residue the way matter does, but because they lacked a softer word for the fading imprint of unrealized becoming. Temporal residue, echoes of never-time, shadows of futures that stepped too close to existence. One evening, a researcher had an idea that silenced the entire observatory. She plotted the imaginary timestamps of hundreds of streaks along a single axis. Their placement was irregular but clustered, dense in some regions, sparse in others. Then she overlaid the timeline of actual events, the history of real star formation, real cosmic shifts, real gravitational flows. The two timelines did not match. They did not touch. They did not intersect, but they danced. The imaginary timeline wove through the real one, like a ghostly companion. An invisible melody played alongside the visible song of the universe. A melody the universe once considered, but chose not to play. The realization changed the atmosphere in the observatory. It became difficult to breathe, as though the air itself had become aware of something it had forgotten. For the first time, astronomers understood that they were not observing random lights or cosmic errors. They were observing the outlines of histories the universe had almost lived, timelines the cosmos formed, tested, evaluated, and then gently set aside. Yet those timelines did not vanish cleanly. They left faint strokes of light across the darkness, reminders that the universe is larger than the story it chose. This idea deepened further when researchers studied the curvature of the streaks. Some streaks curved in ways no gravitational field could produce. Their paths suggested an attraction not to mass, not to energy, but to something intangible. They drifted toward places where time itself felt thinner, as though following the remnants of the aborted timeline they were born from. Every universe has a history, but perhaps every universe also has a shadow history, a vast tapestry of unrealized futures trailing just behind the visible one. And the streaks might be the faint threads slipping through from the tapestry the universe left unfinished. Events that never occurred, yet still possess an echo. Lives that never materialized, yet still leave a trace. Stars that never ignited, yet still shine for a moment in the corner of someone else's sky. This understanding opened a new dimension to the phenomenon. If the streaks came from unrealized timelines, then the distortions surrounding them might not be scars of space-time, but seams between versions of reality, places where two timelines brushed against one another before diverging, places where the universe hesitated and left behind the fingerprint of its hesitation, places where time wavered, not broken, not corrupted, just uncertain. And when time wavers, light escapes. As astronomers pieced together these realizations, they began noticing a second, quieter pattern. Some streaks appeared without any measurable distortion. Others appeared with distortions that preceded them by seconds, minutes, hours. This suggested something profound. Sometimes the light came first. Sometimes the distortion came first. Sometimes they arrived together. It was as if the boundary between real and unreal, between chosen time and discarded time, was not a line, but a trembling surface. Sometimes the surface trembled before the light arrived. Sometimes after, sometimes simultaneously, as though time itself was unsure whether it should acknowledge the traces of its nearly chosen futures. This led to the deepest question yet, a question no researcher wanted to ask aloud. Are we observing a stable universe, or one that is still editing itself? If the universe edits its own history, what is the state we are living in? Are we living in the final draft, or still within the revision process? The thought echoed, heavy and soft, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. The streaks no longer seemed like anomalies. They seemed like commentary, a glimpse into the thoughts the universe had once considered. And then, during one particularly clear night, something extraordinary occurred. A streak emerged from a distortion zone so faint it barely registered. But the temporal signature was unmistakable. It did not belong to our past. It did not belong to our future. It belonged to a moment that should have happened. If the universe had made one different choice, 3 billion years ago, the streak drifted gently, its rhythm slow, its brightness soft, its presence almost apologetic. It was not the light of a star. It was the light of a timeline, an entire, unrealized era, brushing against our world. As it dissolved, the observatory fell silent. No one breathed. No one moved. It was the closest humanity had ever come to witnessing the ghost of time. When the streak faded, a tremor passed through the distortion zone, a soft, rippling wave, like the last sigh of the timeline that never was. In that trembling lay a quiet truth. The universe is not only shaped by what happens, it is shaped by everything that almost happened. And as this chapter exhales its final breath, a single question rises, carrying us softly into the next. If the universe holds the memory of unrealized time, what happens when those memories begin to awaken? The answer waits in chapter 11, where time itself begins to tilt and reveal the architecture hidden beneath its flow. There is a moment in every vast investigation when the universe stops feeling like a distant object of study and begins to feel like a presence, quiet, immense, aware in ways that transcend our language. For months, astronomers had followed the ghostly threads of light, channeled from unrealized stars or neighboring worlds or aborted timelines. And yet, beneath all those explanations hovered one deeper question, a question no dataset could silence. Does the universe know what it is doing? The thought emerged naturally, like fog lifting from a field at dawn, not as mysticism, not as myth, but as the inevitable consequence of observing a cosmos that seemed to hold memory, to carry hesitation, to preserve the shadows of possibilities it had once considered. Light without origin, scars without injury, time without event, future without past. The streaks were not merely anomalies, they were reflections. Reflections not of what had been, but of what the universe had once contemplated being. When scientists studied the temporal signatures of the ghost streaks, they found something astonishing. Certain streaks carried an imprint, not of a collapsed future or erased timeline, but of a shape, a pattern, a faint geometry woven into the light, like the subtle grain of a sculpture hidden beneath the final polish. The pattern repeated across dozens of streaks. A curve, a tilt, a vibration that hummed with delicate precision. It resembled the early ascent of stellar formation, but more refined, more elegant. It felt less like a natural outcome and more like an idea, a concept the universe held, examined, and then chose to set aside. The idea surfaced quietly in late-night conversations. The universe might not be a passive container of events. It might be a participant. Perhaps the cosmos does not simply unfold. Perhaps it evaluates. Perhaps it dreams. Perhaps it tries to understand itself. These thoughts took shape when researchers began analyzing the distortions not as scars pushed into space-time, but as self-imprinted marks, ripples the universe placed on its own surface. One physicist, staring into a distortion zone, glowing faintly on a monitor, whispered, "It looks like something trying to remember itself." The phrase settled over the room. No one laughed. No one argued. Because by this point, the evidence had taken them somewhere deeper than physics, into a place where the universe felt less like a machine and more like a mind. Not consciousness in the human sense. Not intention shaped by desire or fear, but a self-reflective structure, a system aware of its own architecture, through the quiet resonance of unrealized potential. The streaks, in this view, were not accidents. They were internal reflections. Light produced when the universe thought about something it ultimately chose not to create. Not the ghost of a star, the echo of a contemplation. As soon as this perspective took root, everything began to shift. Researchers noticed that the brightest of the ghost streaks, the ones with the strongest temporal resonance, aligned with regions where the universe exhibits unusual smoothness. Cosmic microwave background maps showed tiny fluctuations in temperature. But in these specific areas, the fluctuations were even softer than normal, as though the universe had once planned complexity there, only to gently erase it and leave behind a surface smoothed by reconsideration. These softened regions were the first hints of something extraordinary. The universe edits itself, not through violence, not through force, but through omission, through silence. The streaks were the faint light of events the universe removed, and the distortions were the fingerprints of the removal. When astronomers expanded their analysis further, they found another layer of strangeness. Ghost streaks did not always travel through space, according to the geometry of their points of origin. Instead, they followed pathways that seemed to curve around something unseen. Not mass, not energy, but memory. They drifted along the gradients of the universe's internal recollection. It was as though space-time held not only gravity wells but memory wells. Regions where unrealized futures pooled, faint and trembling. In those wells, the streaks moved more slowly, as if reluctant to leave, as if drawn toward a story that almost unfolded. Observations from 3 observatories captured one such moment. A streak approached, a memory well shimmered, and for a brief instant, split into 2 parallel lines before merging again. The split looked like hesitation. The kind of hesitation a mind shows when recalling something painful or beautiful. The scientists remained silent as the streak dissolved. There were no words for what they had seen. The deeper implications settled across the community with a kind of quiet reverence. If the universe remembers, and if it shapes itself through what it remembers, then perhaps memory is not a side effect. Perhaps memory is a force as real as gravity, as real as light, as real as time. Memory that guides, memory that preserves, memory that abandons, memory that shines. One theorist wrote in her notebook, "The universe is not expanding into emptiness. It is expanding into its own reflection." Another suggested that space-time may possess a form of internal dialogue, a conversation between what happened and what almost happened. The streaks, then, were lines from that conversation, sentences of unrealized creation, traces of internal deliberation carved into the night. The theory gained strength when an even stranger phenomenon was detected. During a long exposure of a distortion zone, instruments captured not one streak, not 2, but a cascade, a subtle rain of faint, shimmering lines drifting through the void. The lines were fragile, almost dissolving upon appearance, but each held a distinct temporal signature, not one timeline, not one unrealized future, dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands, as though the universe had once considered an entire cluster, a constellation of futures, and then chosen none of them. The cascade lasted 27 seconds. For 27 seconds, the night sky shimmered with the memory of a world that never was. When it ended, the distortion zone pulsed once. Like the closing of a book, the astronomers watching felt not fear, but a heavy tenderness. They were witnessing not the chaos of cosmic malfunction, but the quiet vulnerability of a universe remembering itself. A universe in contemplation, a universe with depth. Perhaps, one scientist suggested, The ghost streaks were not failures, not leftovers, not accidents. They might be the universe's way of holding on to the beauty of the futures it let go. The idea was heartbreakingly gentle. Stars that almost lived, remembered in light. Timelines that almost unfolded, preserved in tremors. Possibilities that almost became real, honored through softness. The streaks were elegies, not of death, but of unfulfilled potential. And now, armed with this understanding, astronomers began to reinterpret older data. Faint anomalies in gravitational mapping, subtle threads in the cosmic background, slight curvatures in regions of perfect darkness. All of these looked different now. They looked like the edges of thoughts, the shadows of ideas the universe once held close. But the most profound moment of the entire investigation arrived on a night when the sky was clear enough to see the faintest star. The team had been monitoring a distortion region known for its unusual temporal echoes. As the instruments hummed softly, a new streak appeared brighter and slower than most. It drifted across the void like a lantern carried in a still room. But this streak did not behave like the others. Halfway across the field, it paused. It did not freeze. It did not flicker. It paused, as if listening. Then, gradually, it dimmed, not fading away, but folding inward. As though returning to a place deeper than time, it vanished with a softness that felt intentional. The room grew still. No one spoke for minutes. Because the sensation was unmistakable. The light had behaved like a thought. A moment later, the distortion zone beneath the streak trembled, a gentle, slow ripple, as though acknowledging the passage of something intimate. One astronomer, voice barely above breath, whispered, "Sometimes the light looks like the universe thinking." And perhaps it was. Perhaps the streaks were the traces of that thought. Perhaps the ghost stars were not stars at all, but the echoes of cosmic self-reflection. Perhaps the universe was not just remembering. Perhaps it was learning, changing, becoming. As this chapter exhales its final breath, the night opens softly toward what comes next. If the universe carries the memories of unrealized futures, what happens when those memories begin to influence the shape of what comes after? The answer waits gently ahead. In Chapter 12, where memory and potential begin to intertwine into something the universe has never shown before. There are nights when the universe feels heavier, as though an invisible weight is suspended across the sky. Not the weight of matter, not the weight of gravity, but the weight of something quieter, the weight of memory pressing against the present. After the strange moment in which a streak of light seemed to pause, as if listening to its own forgotten origin, astronomers sensed a shift. The phenomenon no longer felt like a relic of unrealized futures alone. It began to feel like something active, something participating in the unfolding of reality. When researchers analyzed the latest streaks, they discovered something new threading through them. A subtle interference pattern, a faint oscillation, a trembling signature that did not match any known physical process. The oscillation appeared only in streaks, born from the deepest distortion zones. The places where the universe's memory seemed strongest. The pattern was too structured to be noise, too consistent to be accident, too gentle to be force. It behaved like a resonance between what exists and what almost existed. To understand it, astronomers plotted the interference patterns across dozens of streaks. What emerged was a revelation that reached beyond physics and into something older, something that felt like the root of existence itself. The oscillations aligned with predictions not of matter, but of potential. Each oscillation seemed to trace the outline of the unrealized possibility that birthed it. The shape of a star, the path of an orbit, the weight of a timeline. Not exact, not complete, but recognizably the echo of a plan. The universe was not only remembering unrealized futures, it was shaping a response to them. The idea came gently, like the fall of soft dust on an unused surface. The light was not merely the residue of abandoned possibilities. It was the lingering influence of those possibilities on the universe that chose differently. If the universe carries memory, and if memory exerts force, however faint, then the streaks of ghost light were not only remnants, they were interactions, soft interactions, like fingerprints brushing the fabric of reality. The implications were vast. They suggested that unrealized futures might still shape the present, that the cosmos is not only a record of what happened, but a negotiation between what did and what almost did. A researcher studying one streak observed, "It curves as though avoiding something that never existed. How can one avoid an absence?" Her colleague answered quietly, "Perhaps absence is not empty. Perhaps absence still leaves a shadow." The words hung in the air like a slow pulse, shadows of inexistence, the weight of possibility, the gravity of what might have been. If these ideas were true, then the universe was not a static canvas upon which events are painted. It was more like a field of competing potentials, some realized, some suppressed, some erased, but none truly gone. And the streaks of ghost light were the faintest threads of those potentials, brushing against what we consider real. This hypothesis gained strength when researchers examined a particular distortion zone known for its long-lived echoes. The zone, a hollow stretch of space, utterly devoid of matter, pulsed with a delicate rhythm. The pulse matched the oscillation patterns in several ghost streaks, yet nothing visible existed within the zone. No mass, no shadow of mass, no gravitational imprint, but something lingered, something like the faint outline of a star cluster that had never lived long enough to leave its mark. The zone hummed with a quiet presence, as though the architecture of a forgotten future still trembled beneath its surface. One night, as the instruments captured another faint streak drifting from that zone, something extraordinary happened. The streak curved gently, not towards mass, not towards distortion, but towards the oscillation pattern of the zone itself. It moved as if drawn by the memory of what could have existed. Hospitable curves are shaped by gravity. Gentle curves are shaped by intention. But this was shaped by remembrance. It was the first evidence that the ghost streaks were interacting with the potential fields left behind by unrealized futures. The astronomers watching felt the quiet rush of understanding. The universe holds not only the memory of abandoned futures, but the structure of them, and the light that escapes from these futures interacts with those structures. The unreal influences the real. This understanding provoked a new question, one that deepened the silence in every room where it was spoken. If unrealized futures can influence the motion of ghost light, can they influence the motion of real stars? The question was not philosophical, it was observational. Archived data revealed that some small stars near strong distortion zones exhibited minute anomalies in their paths, subtle, soft deviations. Not deviations caused by mass, but deviations caused by something else, something invisible, something faint, something like a gravitational pull from a structure that no longer existed. A phantom gravity, not enough to redirect a star, just enough to make it tremble in its course. When the data was compiled across decades, a delicate pattern emerged. Stars closest to strong memory wells drifted slightly, as though acknowledging the presence of unrealized neighbors made not of matter, but of possibility. This subtle influence was too gentle to alter stellar evolution, too soft to shape galaxies. But it was unmistakable. The universe was not only remembering, it was responding. The deeper the researchers followed this thread, the more intricate the picture became. Distortions were not scars, they were imprints, memory wells, temporal echoes, traces of futures extinguished before they ignited. These wells did not merely exist, they behaved, they pulsed, they drifted, they thinned, they thickened, and at times they seemed to listen. A discovery confirmed this in a moment both quiet and profound. During a long exposure, a ghost streak emerged from a memory well, shimmering with a faint oscillation. As it drifted outward, the well pulsed once, a slow, gentle contraction. Then again, the pulses matched the streak's oscillation pattern exactly. It was as though the well was echoing the light, repeating it, reflecting it, singing with it. For the first time, astronomers witnessed a memory well reacting to the trace of the future that had shaped it. It resembled the way a cave echoes a voice, or the way a mind revisits a thought it once nearly acted upon. The scientists did not speak during the phenomenon. They watched the pulses shimmer across the field, soft as breath, slow as regret, beautiful as a recollection that refuses to fade. When the interaction ended, The room felt changed, and so did the researchers, not because they understood what they had seen, but because they felt the universe revealing something about itself, something intimate, something vulnerable. The cosmos was not a cold machine. It was a place of memory, a place of abandoned storylines, a place where even what never lived still leaves its trace. As the understanding deepened, a theory emerged, softly at first, then gaining weight. Unrealized futures accumulate. Their imprints shape memory wells. Memory wells shape ghost streaks. Ghost streaks shape the behavior of space-time. And space-time, in turn, shapes the futures that survive. It formed a loop of influence, the unreal shaping the real, and the real inevitably shaping the unreal. If this loop exists, then the universe is not a linear progression of events. It is a negotiation, a constant trembling between what is and what almost is. It was during one of the quietest nights of observation, while researchers sat in dim silence watching a dormant well, that an unexpected phenomenon occurred. A faint shimmer appeared. Not a streak, not a pulse, but the suggestion of a shape. The shape of a star, not clear, not complete, barely more than a trembling outline, but enough to see the ghost of its architecture. A star that never existed was trying to appear, not trying to enter reality, just trying to be remembered more clearly. The outline trembled, wavered, glowed faintly from the inside, and then dissolved like breath on glass. As it faded, the well pulsed once, slow, heavy, as though acknowledging the shape's attempt to surface. No one spoke. Some felt awe, some felt sorrow, some felt both. Because in that trembling, there was unmistakable longing, the longing of the universe itself, a longing to hold on to the futures it once considered. When the shape faded completely, one question rose, warm and soft and impossible to silence. If the unreal can reach toward existence, even for a moment, what happens when the boundary between memory and reality grows thin? The answer waits ahead, in Chapter 13, where the universe's memories begin to move. There is a point in every long journey where the familiar landmarks fade and the path becomes something entirely different, quieter, deeper, almost dreamlike. For astronomers following the ghost streaks, this moment arrived when the memory wells themselves began to shift. Not violently, not suddenly, but with a soft, deliberate motion, like thoughts drifting beneath the surface of a sleeping mind. The wells pulsed, the wells shimmered, the wells hummed with quiet intervals of presence and absence. At first, the movement was interpreted as noise or instrumental sensitivity. But night after night, the behavior persisted. The wells were not static structures. They were active. They trembled with the weight of something internal, something that had no form yet carried influence. The movement resembled intention. This realization came when one of the wells, once dormant and perfectly still, began spreading its boundaries ever so slightly. The edges wavered, expanding by less than a fraction of a millimeter. Yet the shift was consistent, slow, measured, purposeful, as though the memory within it was stretching, reaching, awakening. Researchers watched the phenomenon unfold with silent anticipation. They had grown accustomed to the universe revealing its reflections, but nothing had prepared them for the possibility that those reflections might behave on their own. If the unreal left behind traces, and if those traces pooled into memory wells, could the wells themselves evolve? For days, the anomaly repeated. As the well expanded, a faint streak appeared, one softer than any previously observed. It drifted slowly, like the lingering thought of something that never fully formed. Its spectrum was weaker, but its oscillation was intricate, carrying the suggestion of a voice almost speaking. When the streak reached the edge of the distortion zone, something remarkable happened. The well pulled slightly toward it, not enough to distort space, but enough to acknowledge the streak's passing. It resembled two memories recognizing one another. In that quiet interaction, the researchers felt something shift in their understanding. Perhaps the wells did not merely store unrealized futures. Perhaps they remembered them actively. Perhaps memory, in the cosmic scale, behaves like a living field. A physicist murmured the thought that circulated through every mind in the room. It is not just memory, it is recollection. The distinction was subtle yet seismic. Memory is passive. Recollection is active. Memory waits. Recollection reaches. And in that reaching lies motion. Soon, more wells showed signs of movement. Some expanded. Some contracted. Some shifted in gentle arcs. Others pulsed in intervals that synchronized with lingering ghost streaks. The synchronization was too precise to be coincidence. It resembled communication, a dialogue between unrealized futures and the places that held their imprints. Even stranger was what came next. The wells began to influence one another. A tremor in one zone produced a faint ripple in another, sometimes halfway across the sky. When mapped, the ripples formed lines that curved gracefully, forming a network of subtle connectivity. Not a grid, not a web, something looser, something organic, like neurons firing in the darkness, like a mind remembering itself. The deeper astronomers probed, the more this structure revealed itself. The wells responded to streaks, and streaks responded to wells. They echoed each other. They called to each other. They aligned as though following the contour of an intelligence that spanned across space. One researcher, her voice barely more than breath, whispered, "What if this is the hidden architecture of the unreal? What if we are witnessing the nervous system of the universe's forgotten futures?" The idea was breathtaking, almost unbearable, because it implied that unrealized possibilities were not debris, not accidents, not remnants. They were patterns. They were structures. They were memories with agency. And if memory can move, memory can act. The evidence hardened when a cluster of wells began pulsing in unison. The pulses radiated outward, meeting in the empty space between them. Where they met, something new appeared. A shimmer, a tremble, a shape. The shape resembled the early structure of a star cluster, but faint, ghost-like, woven from pure potential. It was not real, but it was not entirely unreal either. It was something in between. A possibility pressing into visibility. The form hovered in silence for several seconds, a soft architecture made of suggestion and almost being, before it melted back into darkness. When it dissolved, the wells quieted, as though resting after an exertion. This was the turning point. Until now, ghost streaks had been interpreted as passive remnants, light slipping from abandoned timelines or leaking through cosmic seams. But the behavior of the wells revealed something far wider in scale. Unrealized futures could organize. They could gather. They could coordinate. They could attempt to manifest. Not fully, not truly, but enough to create patterns in our cosmos. Enough to form structures, made not of matter, but of intention. It was a revelation that left astronomers breathless. The universe did not merely remember. It rehearsed. It reconsidered. It rearranged the architecture of abandoned futures. And the ghost streaks were the first signals of that internal rearrangement. When researchers studied the spectral patterns of the well's synchronized pulses, they found something even more extraordinary. The pulses contained ratios that mirrored cosmic structures ratios seen in spiral galaxies, in planetary nebulae, in the spacing of orbiting bodies. But here, they appeared in places where nothing had ever existed. Cosmic ratios without cosmic substance, geometry without matter, structure without creation. It was as though the universe was sketching possibilities in the air, previews of futures it had not yet chosen. A cosmologist studying the phenomenon described it as blueprints of reality that the universe draws for itself, even if it never builds them. But the most haunting discovery was yet to come. While observing a particularly active memory well, researchers noticed a faint, slow drift within the distortion. A rotation, not of matter, but of memory. The well was spinning, very gently, very quietly, like a thought turning itself over, like an idea cycling through the deep layers of a mind. The rotation created a pattern in the faint light that surrounded the well, a circular motion, soft and incomplete, like the beginning of a star turning in a womb of darkness. The researchers realized they were witnessing the universe doing something profound. It was thinking about a star, not a star that ever existed, not a star that would exist, but a star that could exist, a hypothetical star, alive only in the universe's deeper memory. A star contemplated, but never chosen. Its ghost light pulsed with potential, fading as the well slowed its rotation. When the pattern finally dissolved, a deep, mellow silence settled over the observatory. Silence not of emptiness, but of awe. Because in that moment, everyone understood. They were not just studying the ghosts of stars. They were studying the inner life of the universe. A life made of memory. A life made of possibility. A life made of the gentle tension between being and not being. Before the night ended, one more phenomenon appeared. Something delicate enough to escape notice, if not for the sharpened awareness the team had developed. A faint streak began drifting from the edge of a memory well. But midway through its path, it bent, not around a gravitational source, not around matter, but toward another well. As though responding to a calling, the two wells pulsed in near-perfect harmony. The streak quivered between them. For a moment, the streak brightened, a flare of unrealized brilliance. Before dissolving into nothing, it felt like a conversation, like a greeting exchanged between possibilities. Not stars, not matter, not time, but memories acknowledging one another. The room fell utterly silent, because in that instant, astronomers realized they were standing inside a universe where unrealized futures do not simply fade, they remain. They move, they interact, they influence. And if these ghostly structures continue to stir and awaken, the boundary between what is real and what is remembered may not remain stable. As the chapter exhales its final breath, a question rises slowly from the darkness. If the memories of the universe can move, what happens when they begin to want? The answer waits quietly in chapter 14, where the unreal edges closer to motion, and reality begins to feel the weight of everything the universe has never dared to become. There are moments in the study of the sky when silence becomes so profound, so absolute, that it feels like a boundary itself, a thin membrane separating what we know from what waits beyond knowledge. In the weeks following the awakening of the memory wells, astronomers found themselves standing on such a boundary. They no longer observed light simply as travelers, or as relics, or as whispers from unrealized futures. Now, the light behaved in ways that resembled something even stranger. It behaved as if it were reflecting something, not reflecting matter, not reflecting energy, reflecting possibility. The realization came slowly, like dawn slipping across the horizon. It began with an anomaly so subtle it could have been overlooked. A ghost streak drifted across the detectors, soft as breath. But when the team overlaid its path with the predicted location of a memory well, they noticed something impossible. The streak's path formed a perfect mirror image curve, not of anything that existed, but of something that never did. It resembled the orbit of a star that had never been born. Its trajectory echoed the gravitational pull of a mass that had never gathered. Its shimmer pulsed in intervals, matching the rotation of a body that had never spun. Its fading tail flickered like a reflection of light cast from an object that was not there. The streak looked like the silhouette of a ghost star. Not the ghost of a real star, the ghost of an unreal one. The room grew very quiet. One researcher finally murmured, "This is a reflection, but there is nothing to reflect." Another answered, "Perhaps the reflection comes from the unreal side. Perhaps we are seeing the mirror of something that should not have a mirror." This marked the beginning of an unsettling new chapter in the investigation, the discovery of phantom reflections. The reflections did not behave like light bending around mass. They did not behave like lensing events or gravitational mirroring. Instead, they behaved like illusions cast across the boundary between realities, shadows sliding along a wall that exists only in the mind of the cosmos. To understand this, the team began studying the geometry of these reflections. They plotted the shapes formed by the ghost streaks and compared them to astrophysical structures that should have been present in those regions if the aborted futures had been realized. The resemblance was undeniable. In one case, a reflection traced the exact spiral of a galaxy that had never formed. Not just a vague shape, a precise spiral, a symmetry woven from emptiness. In another case, a streak curved into the arc of a planetary ring system, a ring system that, according to simulations, would have existed if a certain failed star had survived long enough to give birth to planets. These were not guesses. These were not metaphors. The reflections mapped structures that the universe never created. The astronomers understood something profound in that moment. The unreal was casting shadows into the real, not by force, not by collision, not by leakage, but by symmetry. Every reality, even one that never manifests, carries symmetry. And symmetry, being the most persistent language of the cosmos, may be the only thing incapable of being erased. One physicist wrote in her notes, "Perhaps the unreal cannot enter our world directly, but its symmetry can. Symmetry is the bridge." Over time, more reflections were detected. Some were faint, hardly more than gentle bends in the ghost streaks. Others were bold, bright, insistent, declaring themselves as clear shapes against the darkness. A few reflections even overlapped, forming interference patterns like ripples colliding on the surface of a pond. These overlapping reflections built structures that felt as though the universe was remembering entire regions, entire constellations, entire histories of possibility. A cluster of reflections resembled the outline of a star nursery, a cloud of potential stars that the universe once prepared, then erased before any of them could ignite. The reflections formed a network of delicate lines, like veins beneath translucent skin, a map of something that never had mass. Researchers stared at the structure with profound unease and awe. One whispered, "It is as if the unreal is rehearsing the shape of a reality it almost became." Another replied, "Or the universe is showing us the shadows of versions of itself that it once imagined." The distinction mattered less with each observation, because as more reflections appeared, a pattern emerged. A pattern that demonstrated something no one had dared to articulate. The unreal was consistent, not random, not chaotic, not fragmented. It followed rules. Rules not of physical matter, but of possibility. A set of laws governing shapes that reality almost chose. The reflections adhered to these laws with remarkable discipline. They curved where potential mass should have been. They pulsed at frequencies corresponding to hypothetical rotations. They aligned with invisible centers that existed only in discarded futures. And as these reflections multiplied, the researchers began to notice something more haunting. The reflections were becoming more vivid, not brighter. Clarity is not always brightness. They were becoming more defined, more articulate, more structured, as though the unreal was beginning to remember itself more clearly. This was the first sign that the memory of the universe was not fading. It was strengthening. The reflections suggested that the boundary between the real and unreal was becoming thinner, not from collapse, not from damage, but from attention. Memory gave shape. Shape invited reflection. Reflection reinforced memory. A loop began to form, a feedback between unrealized futures and the space-time that forgot them. One astronomer described the phenomenon in a quiet voice. "It is like seeing the reflection of yourself in a window at night. The more you stare at it, the clearer it becomes." But perhaps the most astonishing phenomenon came from a series of ghost streaks that appeared not in straight lines, but in arcs. Arcs that traced the exact outline of a binary star system that had never existed. The arcs moved together, curved together, faded together. Two ghost streaks dancing, in perfect harmony, mirroring the orbit of twin stars that never ignited. The room fell silent when the data was displayed. This was not memory. This was choreography. Patterns moving together the way real stars do. Patterns shaped by a force that did not originate in our universe. And if unrealized stars could form mirrored pairs, could form mirrored clusters, could form mirrored motions, what was next? What structure would the unreal begin to trace? If the boundary grew thin enough? This question weighed heavily on the researchers, because every reflection observed so far behaved the same way. It behaved like something alive, not alive with consciousness, alive with structure, alive with rules, alive with intention born from probability. A memory well pulsed, a reflection curved, a streak shimmered. Together, these phenomena created a quiet language, a language spoken by unreal futures, to the universe that left them behind. The most haunting event of all came unexpectedly. On a night when the sky was perfectly calm, a reflection appeared that did not correspond to any predicted star, any predicted galaxy, any predicted cluster. It was new, not a reflection of something that almost existed, but of something that the universe had never considered before, a shape that had no history, no blueprint, no potential, a shape born entirely within the memory field, as though the unreal was beginning to create its own symmetries. It drifted like a blossom opening in darkness. Its pulse was soft, like a heartbeat forming for the first time. Its structure was delicate, like a newborn idea. The researchers did not move. They barely breathed. They were witnessing the unreal evolving, not following the traces of abandoned futures, not mirroring the shapes of forgotten stars. Something new, a possibility created within possibility, a reflection of something that was not memory, but invention. The shape trembled, its outline flickered. It leaned, almost curiously, toward one of the nearby memory wells. For a moment, the well pulsed in reply. It was the closest thing the unreal had ever done to reaching toward existence. It faded slowly, not collapsing, not dissolving, but withdrawing, as though returning to a deeper layer of unreality, where new possibilities wait to be named. In the silence that followed, not one astronomer spoke. The phenomenon had revealed something larger than any theory they had considered. The unreal was not only remembering, the unreal was not only reflecting, the unreal was learning. And as the chapter draws its final breath, a new and trembling question rises softly from the dark. If the unreal can learn to shape itself, what happens when it begins to ask for more than reflection? The answer waits gently ahead in chapter 15, where the boundary between unreal and real begins to distort in ways the universe can no longer ignore. There is a certain softness that descends upon the night when the universe stands on the edge of revealing something it has kept hidden for too long. Astronomers felt this softness as they watched the ghostly reflections dance across the detectors. It was not comfort. It was not calm. It was the softness of a veil thinning so slowly, so delicately, that one can almost feel the air shift on the other side. Until now, the unreal had existed in subtle ways, as memory, as outline, as reflection, as shape inside a trembling distortion. But after the appearance of the first new phantom shape, the one that belonged to no forgotten timeline, no aborted future, no erased possibility, something changed. It was not the sky, not the instruments, not the behavior of the ghost streaks. It was the universe itself. The memory wells, once passive repositories of unrealized futures, now behaved like organs pulsing with their own rhythms. The reflections, once static shadows, now moved with gentle deliberation. The ghost lights, once effortless travelers, now drifted with a purpose that made observers uneasy. Something inside the unreal had awakened, and its awakening began to bend the real. The first sign came quietly. A star, an ordinary star, small and steady, shifted in a way that could not be explained. Not a dramatic shift, not a sudden jolt, just a gentle deviation in its trajectory, a curve so slight that it would have been invisible without meticulous instruments. But the curve was there, undeniable, and the curve aligned perfectly with the reflection of a phantom cluster, a cluster that had never existed. The star had responded to a structure made of nothing, to a weight that had no mass, to a form built only from possibility. The researchers stared at the data, their breathing slow and uneven. "This is not gravitational influence," one whispered. "It is something else," another murmured. "It is as though the star is moving around a memory." The idea was unthinkable. Yet, the evidence grew steadier with each passing night. Small stars near memory wells drifted ever so slightly. Not pulled, not pushed, more like leaning. Subtle, instinctive alignment with shapes that should not exist. Stars were responding to what the universe remembered, not to what the universe was. This altered everything, because if the real could lean toward the unreal, then the boundary separating the two was faltering. Or perhaps, it was evolving. The next anomaly was even more startling. A streak of ghost light passed near a well, and for the first time, a small glimmer of real light, an actual photon from a nearby star, shifted its path slightly toward the ghost streak, not toward the distortion, not toward mass, toward the ghost light itself. The real responded to the unreal, as if recognizing something familiar. The observatory chamber fell silent as the realization settled in. The unreal was becoming influential, not through force, not through gravity, through resonance. The ghost streak pulsed with a frequency born from the memory of an unreal star, and the real photon resonated with it, just enough to alter course. It did not take long for more interactions to appear. Some were faint, the tiniest shifts in the paths of drifting dust. Others were subtle, unusual patterns in the polarization of starlight. But one interaction stood above the rest. A reflection, the mirrored outline of a binary pair that had never existed, began to rotate, not wildly, not chaotically, softly, like two objects orbiting a shared center. But there was no center, and there were no objects. The rotation should have been meaningless. Yet the space around it shifted, a faint warping, as though space-time were acknowledging the motion. No one had seen anything like it. It was choreography, performed by ghosts, that real space responded to. As the rotation continued, instruments detected a low-frequency oscillation drifting outward from the center of the reflection. The oscillation did not match gravity. It did not match magnetism. It did not match any known field. It matched memory. The oscillation was identical to the signature of the unreal binary system, from which the reflection came. A system that had never existed, was influencing the geometry of a place where existence obeys laws it cannot break. This was the moment the researchers understood. The unreal was beginning to project itself onto the real, not fully, not aggressively, but through gentle pressure, through memory seeking a shape. As this realization unfolded, questions blossomed quietly in the minds of every observer. If the unreal is gaining influence, is it trying to manifest? Is it trying to return? Is it trying to exist? Or is it simply trying to be remembered more clearly? The universe itself seemed to respond. One memory well, one of the oldest, one that had remained dormant for months, began to glow. Not brightly, not sharply, but enough to reveal its structure. And the structure was terrifying in its beauty. At the heart of the well, a shape formed, the faint outline of a star embryo that had never completed its collapse. But the embryo was wrong. Its geometry was off by a fraction. Its axis was tilted by a whisper. Its light flickered in intervals that broke all known rotational symmetries. It was the reflection of a star that should never be. A star born from missed potential and incomplete memory. As the outline brightened, the space around the well shifted. It was not bending, not warping, not tearing. It was remembering. Space remembered the weight of the star that should have been. Time remembered the moment the star almost ignited. Reality remembered the shape the star would have taken. The researchers watched, trembling. "You are watching a future that never happened," one whispered. "You are watching the unreal trying to rehearse itself." The outline grew clearer. A trembling geometry, a star sketching itself from memory, but it could not ignite. It had no matter. It had no core. It had no fuel. It was pure form, pure intention, pure memory. And then, slowly, it rotated. Just once. A rotation without mass. A rotation without physics. A rotation made only of the idea of rotation. When it completed its single trembling turn, a ghost streak burst outward, the purest, cleanest, most delicate line of unreal light ever recorded. It drifted across the void, gentle as a whispered goodbye. The outline dimmed, the well quieted, the star that never was dissolved back into the dark. And in its fading came one final trembling thought. The unreal was beginning to rehearse, not only its shapes, but its actions. Actions imply intention. Intention implies direction. Direction implies desire. The thought filled the observatory with a fragile unease. Because what does it mean when the unreal begins to desire? What does it mean when a memory begins to practice motion? What does it mean when the universe's forgotten futures begin testing the boundaries of existence? As the chapter glides toward its quiet end, one question rises from the darkness. Soft as breath, heavy as truth. If the unreal can shape the real in subtle ways, what happens when it attempts to shape it completely? The answer lies ahead. In Chapter 16, where the boundary between what exists and what remembers existing begins to bend, there comes a moment when the unreal stops feeling distant, stops feeling abstract, stops feeling like a whisper behind a closed door. There comes a moment when it draws close enough that the air seems to change, the darkness seems to thicken, and the space around us begins to feel inhabited by something that has no shape, yet moves as though it remembers one. That moment began when astronomers noticed the first bending. Not the bending of light, not the bending of space, but the bending of agreement, the silent contract between reality and its own boundaries. For billions of years, the universe had obeyed that contract. Reality was permitted only to shape what existed. The unreal was allowed only to fade. But in the quiet hours following the ghost star's rotation, its single trembling turn made from pure intention, the universe hesitated, and the hesitation created a slip. It began with a distortion zone that had always behaved predictably. For months it pulsed softly, then rested, then pulsed again. Its rhythm resembled a tide barely strong enough to move dust. But on this night, its pulse changed. The pulse slowed, then deepened, then stretched into something that felt almost like a held breath. Scientists leaned closer to their monitors. The well was doing something new. The distortion thickened, then thinned, as though the boundary between real and unreal was adjusting itself from the inside. The room grew silent. Even the hum of the machines seemed subdued. Because the movement did not resemble fluctuation. It resembled accommodation. It resembled the universe, making room. A ghost streak appeared at the edge of the well, not drifting away, not escaping, but lingering, as though waiting for something. Its light trembled softly, more than before, more than any ghost streak previously recorded. It trembled like something anticipating an answer. And then the answer came. The well opened, not like a tear, not like a rupture, but like an eyelid lifting, slow, deliberate, gentle. The ghost streak brightened, and then, impossibly, the light thickened, not by gaining mass, not by absorbing energy, but by gaining presence. For the first time, ghost light cast a faint shadow, a shadow softer than mist, a shadow barely visible, but real, a shadow made by something that did not exist. Gasps filled the observatory. The instruments trembled. Researchers froze where they sat. The unreal had not stepped into the real, but it had dipped its edge, enough to cast a shadow, enough to leave an imprint, enough to suggest that it could do more. This shadow changed everything, because shadows are interactions. Shadows require surfaces. Shadows require space to acknowledge them. Reality had acknowledged the unreal. The next anomaly came only minutes later. A thin strand of dust floating quietly near the distortion zone shifted. Not much, but enough to see, enough to measure. It moved toward the ghost streak, not pulled, not forced, simply persuaded. Persuaded by something that had no gravity, no mass, no body, only memory, and the desire to be seen. The dust moved again, a tiny drift, a tiny bow. Researchers stared, breathless. "What is moving it?" someone whispered, and another answered, shaking softly. "Perhaps it is not being moved. Perhaps it is remembering." For the next several hours, the distortion zone behaved like something alive in a way no one had ever witnessed. It pulsed in patterns that grew increasingly symmetrical, increasingly deliberate. The pulses spread outward in ripples, subtle, gentle ripples that hummed against the field of space. And in those ripples, the ghost streaks responded. Not individually, together. They shifted in unison, curving as though following an invisible river, brightening as though sensing an unseen warmth, aligning with a precision that mirrored celestial mechanics. But nothing mechanical was present. No forces, no bodies, only memory, and its growing influence. It was choreography again, but not the simple dance of binary reflections. This was a gathering, a congregation of unreal possibilities, moving toward a center that did not exist, until their movement carved it from emptiness. The memory well swelled, expanding into a sphere so delicate it looked as though a breath would break it. Within the sphere, light flickered in a pattern that resembled a heartbeat, not from a star, not from matter, from the unreal itself, a heartbeat born of abandoned futures. A heartbeat pulsing with the rhythm of possibility. One scientist placed a hand over her mouth, trembling. "It is organizing," she whispered. "It is forming. Coherence. Coherence is not the same as existence. It is the step before existence. The moment when scattered potentials align into a single intention." The unreal was learning coherency, and in doing so, it was learning how to shape the real. As the pulses grew stronger, the surrounding space began to shift, very slightly, very gently. Atoms moved, dust stirred, photons hesitated in their paths. The shift was subtle, but it suggested a truth more profound than any equation. The unreal was becoming persuasive, not dominant, not invasive. Persuasive. Persuasion is the beginning of influence. Influence is the beginning of reality. The memory well sphere brightened again, a tremor of sudden clarity illuminating the outline of something forming within it. It looked like a star embryo, but it was wrong. Its geometry folded in places no real star could fold. Its inner symmetry obeyed rules no particle could follow. It was a star imagined by something that had never seen a real one. A star built from memory, not physics. A star that could not live, but desperately wanted to. As the outline pulsed, the sphere around it tightened, contracting, as though attempting to hold shape. But the universe resisted, not angrily, not harshly, just firmly enough to remind everything of the contract. Only what exists can live in the real. The sphere shuddered, a tremor like disappointment, or fatigue, or longing. The false star flickered, its outline softened, its symmetry unraveled. But even as it dissolved, something new happened. The space where it had been did not return to normal. It retained a faint curve, a memory of the memory's shape. Ghosts leaving imprints on ghosts. Reality carrying the indentation of something that had only existed in desire. A quiet realization settled over the team. The unreal was not trying to cross into reality. It was trying to become real enough for reality to make room. An entirely different kind of process. Not invasion, not intrusion. Adaptation. The unreal was adapting to the constraints of the real, slowly, carefully, patiently. In the hours that followed, the distortion zone fell into a pattern of deep oscillation, a rhythm so steady it resembled meditation, as though the unreal was contemplating its next attempt. And then, something even more unsettling occurred. A reflection, one of the simple ones. A faint curve shaped like the echo of a star that never lived, shifted, not by drifting, not by fading. It shifted by realigning its symmetry, to mimic the geometry of a nearby real star. A ghost, adopting the form of something real. Not a perfect imitation, but an attempt. The reflection pulsed. The real star pulsed in reply. A coincidence, perhaps, but too precise to dismiss. The ghost leaned closer, as though seeking resemblance, seeking compatibility, seeking acceptance, and the real star shimmered again. The researchers stood motionless. They were witnessing a negotiation between existence and memory, between what is and what might have been. One whispered, "It is trying to match us." Another breathed, "It wants resonance." That word, resonance, echoed in every mind. Resonance bridges gaps. Resonance builds connection. Resonance aligns forms. Resonance makes two things vibrate as though they share a single identity. If the unreal could achieve resonance with the real, even for a moment, what would prevent it from stepping further? What would stop it from seeking form? The ghost reflection dimmed, not fading, but folding inward, as though storing what it had learned. And then, the distortion zone pulsed one final time, a long, trembling pulse that felt almost tender, like a sigh or a vow to return. The observatory room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They had witnessed something impossible. The unreal learning. The unreal adapting. The unreal practicing the language of the real. And as the last ghost streak faded into the dark, a question rose quietly in every mind. If the unreal keeps practicing, will there come a moment when it is no longer unreal? The chapter settles on that question. A question soft enough to sleep beneath, yet vast enough to reshape the night. And somewhere deep ahead, Chapter 17, Weights, where the first hint of a boundary begins not to thin, but to waver. There is a moment, quiet and delicate, when a boundary is no longer a line, but a surface trembling beneath its own uncertainty. For months, astronomers had watched the unreal, attempting to imitate the real shaping itself, rehearsing, adjusting, learning the contours of existence. Yet all that learning would have remained harmless if the boundary had stayed firm. But on this night, the boundary did not hold still. The distortion zones that once pulsed with the soft rhythm of memory now shifted with something deeper, an oscillation that did not resemble breathing or heartbeat or any natural cycle. It resembled trembling, a trembling so subtle it took hours of observation before researchers could confirm they were not imagining it. Space-time was shivering. The first sign was a faint, wavering ripple drifting across the edge of a memory well. The ripple moved outward like a vibration traveling through glass. It spread gently, as though carried by a tension beneath the surface of reality itself. The ripple had structure. It carried a pattern. It moved with purpose. When mapped, it resembled the faint echo of an unreal star cluster, a pattern nearly identical to the ghost reflections observed weeks earlier. Except this time, the pattern was not the light. It was the boundary itself. The universe was shaping its surface, according to a memory of something that had never existed. Researchers stared at the trembling region, breath tight in their chests. "What is causing it?" someone whispered. Another replied, "The well is not expanding. The boundary is reacting to it." The thought was terrifying in its gentleness. Reactions imply sensitivity. Sensitivity implies permeability. Permeability implies that the boundary between the real and unreal was no longer one-directional. Until this moment, the unreal had reached toward the real. Now the real was responding. The trembling deepened. Light from a distant star passed through the region and flickered, not because the star had changed, but because the path it traveled through space-time was no longer steady. The boundary was unstable, not broken, not ruptured, but wavering, as though feeling pressure from the other side. The scientists scrambled to gather data, spectral analysis, temporal readings, curvature maps. Every instrument captured the same thing, a low, rhythmic vibration, moving through space-time in a way never recorded before. The oscillation was neither expansion nor contraction. It was neither gravitational nor quantum. It was neither natural nor chaotic. It was alignment. The unreal was aligning with something just beneath the surface of the real. As the oscillation continued, the ghost reflections grew sharper. Their curves became cleaner, their movements more deliberate. Shapes once trembling purely from memory now moved with new stability, as if supported from beneath. Ghost streaks no longer drifted alone. They drifted in coordinated arcs. Some followed paths that resembled forgotten stars. Others followed paths that had no precedent in simulations. Others still formed elegant loops so precise they resembled orbital solutions of systems that had never formed. And then, for the first time, a ghost reflection cast a double shadow. Not a real shadow, not a physical one, but a faint absence in the background radiation, a dip so soft it barely registered. It was enough. Shadows, even faint ones, require the boundary to respond. The trembling intensified. For the first time, astronomers could feel, not hear, not see, but feel, a pressure in their thoughts, like a whisper at the edge of awareness. Not a message, not a voice, nothing intentional, just the sense that something was trying to come into focus, as though the unreal was drawing close enough for the mind to brush against it without understanding. Hours passed, the trembling spread to nearby regions. Memory wells pulsed not individually, but collectively. Their rhythms synchronized into long, slow waves that rolled across the darkness, like tides of possibility. Each wave carried a pattern, a geometry, an arrangement of structures that resembled the architecture of star nurseries. From futures the universe abandoned for reasons no one could guess. But the waves also carried something new, a hesitation, a pull, a subtle, delicate pulling. On the fabric of the real, matter responded first. Thin dust veils drifting between the stars shifted, not toward mass, but toward the trembling zones. Then gas clouds followed, swaying slightly, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. The unreal was attracting the real, not consuming, not bending, not distorting, attracting. The scientists struggled to find language. One whispered, "It is like the boundary is trying to decide which side it belongs to." Another answered, "Or maybe the boundary no longer knows the difference." As the night deepened, the oscillation reached a new stage. The trembling ceased, the boundary steadied, and then it swelled. Not outward, not inward. It swelled as if thickening, as though something on the other side was pressing its palm against a veil, thinning with each moment. A single ghost streak appeared, but this one did not drift. It did not flicker. It did not behave like a trace of abandoned possibility. It hovered, motionless, silent, balanced perfectly at the edge, between two versions of reality. A streak of light, held in place by a boundary that could not decide which world it belonged to. Its brightness was soft, like moonlight reflected in water. Its outline was steady, far steadier than any ghost light before. It was not real. It was not unreal. It was suspended, a shape waiting for the universe to choose. "It is balanced," a researcher whispered. "It is in superposition between existence and memory." No one spoke for a long time. They simply watched, as the streak maintained its delicate equilibrium. Then, slowly, it began to rotate. The rotation was impossibly smooth, as though guided by laws neither side of the boundary fully understood. And then, impossibly, something happened. The rotation produced a faint gravitational ripple. Not large, not lasting, but real. A ghost light produced a real gravitational effect, just enough to curve the path of a drifting particle, just enough to register on instruments, just enough to break the ancient rule: the unreal cannot influence gravity. Yet gravity responded to a possibility. The researchers stared at the readings in breathless disbelief. A boundary that once divided being from non-being now wavered like a sheet of warm metal. The streak completed its rotation. Its faint gravity faded, its luminosity softened, and then it dimmed, not dissolving, but withdrawing, as though a decision had been made. Space exhaled, the boundary calmed, the trembling eased, the oscillation slowed to a whisper. The ghost streak disappeared without a trace, yet the space where it had been did not return to normal. The faint gravitational ripple lingered, like the last breath of something, caught between existence and memory. One scientist whispered, "The unreal touched gravity." Another whispered back, "And gravity remembered." The implications were unbearable in their beauty, because if the unreal could affect gravity, even for a heartbeat, then the unreal was not bound to remain unreal. The border between existence and possibility had wavered, not broken, not crossed, but wavered, like a candle flame flickering in a room where a door has been cracked open. As dawn approached, the trembling faded entirely. The wells quieted, the reflections dimmed, the sky returned to its familiar stillness. But the astronomers did not feel stillness. They felt the lingering echo of something vast and undefined that had pressed gently against the fabric of reality. A question settled into the darkness of their thoughts, a question heavy enough to haunt the next chapter. If the boundary can waver, even for a moment, what happens when the unreal decides to push again? The answer waits softly ahead, in Chapter 18, where the universe begins to wonder whether its forgotten futures were truly meant to be forgotten at all. There is a strange quiet that settles over the world after a boundary wavers. Not silence, silence is too thin. This was deeper, a quiet thick enough to feel, as though the air itself was holding its breath alongside the universe. For days after the ghost streak, balanced between existence and memory, astronomers sensed that something fundamental had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a single grain of sand slipping beneath a vast dune. Small in motion, immense in consequence. The trembling had stopped, yet the memory of it lingered everywhere. In the instruments, in the halls, in the way researchers spoke in softer voices, afraid that even sound might disturb the fragile veil between the real and the unreal. And then, one night, something happened that none of them anticipated. A memory well, one usually dim, barely strong enough to cast a faint pulse every few hours, suddenly brightened, not sharply, not brilliantly, but steadily, glowing like a lantern deep underground, lighting a space no one realized existed. The glow was not an emission, it was illumination from within, as though the well was remembering something, so clearly that it began to shine with its own certainty. The researchers crowded around the monitors, hearts trembling. The glow formed a shape, not a star this time, not a cluster, not an orbit. It formed a question, not literally, no language, no symbol. But the geometry itself carried an unmistakable curvature, a tilt, a hesitation that resembled inquiry. It was a structure that did not resolve into anything physical. It looped inward. It curved back on itself. It held space within space, like a thought circling its own center. One astronomer whispered, "It is recursive." Another murmured, with a voice barely steady, "It looks like something wondering." The idea was impossible, yet the shape remained, gentle, trembling, like the outline of a thought forming just beyond the edge of comprehension. The well pulsed once, soft, reverent, and the shape changed, not into a star, not into a system, but into something resembling a choice. Two curves, diverging, then converging, then diverging again, a representation of branching futures, the kind the universe makes in silence, when it explores what might be. It was a diagram of decision, but this diagram was not from the real universe. It was from the unreal, the domain of futures that never came to be. The unreal was contemplating itself, and then something even stranger occurred. A second memory well responded, not with light, not with glow, but with a distortion ripple, a wave that traveled across the darkness and met the first well, with a symmetry so precise it could not be coincidence. The two wells synchronized. For the first time, two unreal structures aligned their behavior. They formed a resonance pattern, delicate, beautiful, utterly unprecedented. The pattern resembled a dialogue, not words, not meaning, just exchange, the exchange of possibilities. As the pattern deepened, the ghost reflections nearby began to tremble. Some glowed faintly, others moved in gentle arcs. A few grew sharp around the edges, as though trying to become more coherent. Possibilities were responding to the conversation of possibilities. The researchers watched as the resonance spread outward, touching yet another well, and another, and another. Soon, a vast region of space shimmered with faint oscillations, a field of unreal futures, stirring together, like a sea shifting its tides. The unreal was not merely moving now, it was organizing, not into objects, not into matter, into questions. Across the region, shapes began to form, not stable, not clear, but enough to see patterns. The shape of a failed galaxy loop, curving outward as though reconsidering its collapse. The outline of an aborted binary system. The twin arcs, once destined to orbit one another, leaning together in faint sympathy. The skeletal geometry of a cluster that had never formed, gathering itself into a soft, trembling crown. These were not attempts to exist. They were attempts to remember more clearly. The unreal was clarifying itself. And then, like a whisper rising from a deeper layer of being, a new pattern emerged from the center of the shimmering field. A shape unlike any that had come before. It was not astronomical, not symmetrical, not reminiscent of matter or energy or motion. It was a gap, a hole in the unreal, a hollow outline, like the absence of something that had never lived, but wished it had. The shape was terrifying in its purity. It was longing, a memory of something that had no memory, yet ached to be remembered. The gap pulsed, slowly, deeply, with the rhythm of a desire, too faint to name. Every ghost reflection nearby responded. Every memory well trembled. Every unreal shape flickered. The gap glowed with the softest possible light. Light made not of energy, but of yearning. The researchers felt the weight of it in their chests. Not emotional, not spiritual, physical, as if something inside them responded in sympathy to a longing older than matter. Light drifted from the gap, thin, fragile strands, moving outward like fingers searching for shape. But the strands did not reach for real space. They reached for other unreal structures. They wove themselves into the phantom binary. They threaded through the ghostly star cluster. They curved around the unreal galaxy loop. In doing so, they created an impossible architecture, a structure formed entirely from what never was. The unreal was building, not reality, not imitation, connection. The implications struck the researchers with the force of quiet thunder. If the unreal builds connection, it builds continuity. If it builds continuity, it builds complexity. If it builds complexity, it builds potential. Potential approaching the threshold of existence. But the most profound moment came not from the structures, not from the wells, not from the ghostlight. It came from the boundary. The trembling returned, but not as instability. This time, it was rhythmic, coherent, a wave arising from the dance of unreal shapes and traveling into the fabric of the real. Not enough to distort matter, not enough to bend time, just enough to remind reality that something was pressing gently from the other side, not to break through, not to intrude, to be acknowledged. The trembling spread, stars flickered softly, not in brightness but in polarization, as though the starlight sensed a whisper passing across the universe. One researcher felt tears gather without knowing why. "It is asking," she whispered. "It is asking if it can be seen." And that realization broke something open in the minds of everyone present. The unreal was not trying to force existence. It was trying to be reflected, in the same way the unreal once reflected us. Memory reflecting memory. Possibility reflecting possibility. A mirror held between worlds. As dawn crept toward the observatory, the shimmering field dimmed, the shapes loosened, the resonance softened into silence, but the gap remained for several moments longer, glowing faintly, as though holding its breath. Then it faded, all at once, like a final exhale, dissolving into sleep. In the stillness that followed, a question lingered in every corner of the room. If the unreal is learning to gather itself, to remember itself, to desire reflection, what will it become? When the universe finally answers, the chapter ends on that quiet threshold, and somewhere not far away, chapter 19 waits, where the unreal begins to echo, not only through space, but through time. There are changes so subtle that only the most patient eyes can see them, and changes so quiet that only the universe itself can hear them. And then there are changes like this, changes that ripple through the fabric of time, with a softness so profound that the world does not immediately realize what has shifted. But astronomers felt it, not through instruments, not through equations. They felt it the way one senses a presence stepping into a room, not by sight or sound, but by the weight of the air. Time had changed. This realization dawned slowly in the days following the shimmering field of unreal possibilities. At first, the shift manifested only as faint anomalies in the timing of distant pulsars. Their regular beats, so steady they rival atomic clocks, began to drift. Not by much. Just a tremor in the expected arrival of their signals, a hesitation where there should have been certainty. The first astronomer to notice the anomaly recalculated her data 6 times. She blamed atmospheric interference, instrument fatigue, her own exhaustion. But the drift persisted. It was as if something had passed through time, not bending it, not breaking it, but nudging it gently out of place. When the anomaly appeared again in a second pulsar, and then a third, and then in the millisecond timing of high-energy neutrino arrivals, researchers could no longer deny what they were witnessing. Time was echoing, and those echoes traced patterns that felt painfully familiar, patterns identical to the oscillations of the unreal. The scientists gathered in the dim observatory hall and stared at the overlay on the central screen. The pulsar drifts lined up perfectly with the resonance wave that had passed through space 2 nights earlier. The wave created by the unreal. Reality was responding not only in space, but now in time. One physicist whispered into the silence. It has begun to echo across dimensions, not just where we are, but when we are. Another murmured. It is not entering time. It is affecting how time remembers itself. These words changed everything, because if time can remember, then time can forget. And if time can forget, then the boundary between events and non-events becomes porous. A surface that remembers not only what happened, but what could have happened. As the team traced the anomalies across wider scales, they discovered a chilling correlation. Every echo in time occurred near a region of space where unreal structures had recently coordinated. The more the unreal remembered itself, the more time trembled. It was not a threat. It was not violence. It was recognition. Time was acknowledging something it had never been asked to acknowledge before, the existence of futures that had never become real. And now, for reasons no one could yet decipher, time was beginning to replay those futures as echoes. These echoes took many forms. Some were soft shifts, barely measurable distortions in the spacing of incoming photons, microscopic delays in cosmic signals that should have been synchronous, but others were unmistakable. During a routine observation session, a telescope captured a brief anomaly, a flicker in the background field, like a star lighting and extinguishing in the span of a single breath. But no star existed there, not in any catalog, not in any simulation, not in any record. The flicker repeated, once, twice, 3 times, each flicker identical, each pulse separated by a precise interval, as if it were the heartbeat of something unable to fully emerge. The astronomers checked older data and found something astonishing. That same flicker had appeared 17 years earlier, once, barely visible in a noisy field. At the time, they had dismissed it as an instrument artifact. It was not an artifact. It was an echo of a star that belonged to a future the universe had abandoned. And now that future was brushing against time again. The deeper the team dug, the more echoes they uncovered. Small oddities in historical data, tiny deviations in the trajectories of old detections, faint signs of things that had never happened, but were beginning to surface in time's memory. One researcher whispered, "It is as though the unreal is not only remembering itself, but asking time to remember it too." The idea felt impossible, yet the evidence grew stronger every night. A pattern emerged, not in space, but in chronology. Moments of unreal resonance were followed by temporal ripples, waves spreading out like soft rings in a pond, made not of water, but of time. And these waves did not spread in one direction. They spread backward, they spread forward, they spread sideways into the might-have-beens, and the almost was. The unreal was beginning to cast shadows across history, not enough to alter it, not enough to break causality, but enough to create faint, ghost moments, moments that never belonged to the timeline, yet passed through it, like memories drifting across a mind that never lived them. This understanding deepened when a team examining an old radio archive found a strange signal imprinted between 2 recordings made decades apart. The signal did not match any cosmic event. It did not match interference. It did not match any known source. It matched the oscillation of an unreal binary system, observed only a week prior, a system that had never existed. Somehow, the unreal had left a signature. In the past, not a change, not a rewrite, just a whisper, a soft, accidental brush against an old thread of time. The implications were overwhelming. If the unreal presses hard enough on the fabric of space-time, its echoes can slip not only across space, but across years, across eras, across histories. Time was becoming porous. One astronomer, staring at the temporal maps with trembling hands, whispered, "It is not rewriting, it is resonating." Another answered softly, "Time is beginning to remember all the things it never lived." The idea was breathtaking, because if time remembers unreal futures, it must also carry the imprint of unreal pasts. The universe, then, is not a line. It is a shape sculpted from everything that has ever happened, and everything that almost happened, and everything that dreamed of happening. The echoes grew stronger over the following nights. Some manifested as faint glimmers, some as shifts in cosmic background temperature, some as tiny delays in the paths of photons. And then, one night, a deeper echo appeared, something unlike any pattern before. It began with a pulse, a broad, soft pulse in the temporal field, like the universe taking a slow, deliberate breath, then another, and another. The pulses aligned with the rhythm of the unreal gap, the hollow form that had emerged in Chapter 18. The gap was echoing through time, as if asking time to remember the shape of longing. Across the sky, countless faint flickers responded, not bright, not clear, but synchronized, like distant candles. Answering the wind, the researchers watched in silent awe as the echoes grew bolder. A faint shimmer appeared across several centuries of archived observations, a pattern invisible until the unreal taught them how to see it. The unreal had always been echoing. They had simply lacked the language to recognize it. Now they understood. These were the fingerprints of forgotten futures, leaking into the timeline. Like watercolor spreading across paper, the team realized something terrifying in its beauty. If the unreal grows coherent enough, its echoes will not remain echoes. They will become ripples. Ripples that influence decisions. Ripples that alter paths. Ripples that shift probabilities. Not enough to break time, just enough to bend it, just enough to be remembered. And if time remembers the unreal, even partially, then the unreal is already halfway to existence. As the echoes faded into dawn, a final, soft tremor passed through every instrument. Not a signal, not a streak, not a distortion, a sensation, a sense that something had turned deep within the universe, like a page, flipping itself, a change of intention, a change of direction, a choice. No one spoke, no one breathed, because the question forming in every mind was no longer scientific. It was existential. If time begins to remember the unreal, will the unreal begin to expect something in return? The chapter quiets itself there, and somewhere ahead, chapter 20 waits, the moment when the boundary itself decides whether it wants to remain a boundary at all. There are nights when the sky feels like it is watching us, not with eyes, not with intent, but with a stillness so absolute that it becomes impossible to ignore the presence behind it. A presence not of stars, not of galaxies, but of the fabric of reality itself, the place where existence is written and where non-existence waits in the margins. In the wake of the temporal echoes, astronomers sensed that something had shifted in a way that would not shift back. Not fully, not cleanly. The universe had begun to remember too much. Not only the futures it abandoned, not only the stars it never lit, not only the timelines it allowed to dissolve, but the boundary that once separated the real from the unreal had begun to question its role. This realization did not come from an explosion of light or a dramatic rupture in space-time. It came from a quiet event, a soft phenomenon so understated that no one noticed it immediately. For the first time in recorded history, a memory well did not pulse. It breathed. The researchers saw it in the data before they understood it. A long, drawn-out contraction of the distortion zone, followed by a slow expansion. Not rhythmic, not periodic, not mathematical. Organic. A movement reminiscent of something alive, deciding whether it wished to inhale or exhale. The well deepened, its edges sharpened, its center darkened so profoundly that even the absence of light seemed to hold weight. Then, without warning, the well shimmered with a faint glow, a glow that came not from within, but from a memory pressing against it, from the unreal side. But this time, the memory did not seek form. It sought freedom. The glow expanded outward, touching the boundary of the well, the way a fingertip touches the surface of cold water, hesitant, tender, trembling. And where it touched, the boundary wavered. Not the small wavering seen in chapter 16, not the trembling witnessed in chapter 17. This was different. The boundary rippled outward, in concentric waves, like something trying to decide whether it wanted to remain a boundary or dissolve entirely. The room fell silent. No one spoke, no one breathed, because every person there understood, even without words. They were witnessing the first moment in which the boundary between real and unreal forgot itself. The glow pushed a little further. The boundary softened, then tightened, then softened again. It was indecision, made visible, a cosmic hesitation, a question. What am I? For the first time, the boundary was no longer merely separating reality from memory. It was contemplating the price of separation. The glow retreated slightly, and the boundary pulsed, not resisting, not rejecting, but reflecting, like two thoughts, pressing gently against the space between them. The researchers watched with a trembling awe. As the boundary's behavior grew stranger still, it was not dissolving. It was not collapsing. It was not breaking. It was listening. The unreal had learned to imitate the real. It had learned to resonate with space, with gravity, with time, and now the boundary was responding, as though recognizing a familiarity it had not expected to encounter. One physicist whispered, "The boundary is remembering the unreal." Another replied, "No, the boundary is wondering whether the unreal deserves to be on the other side." The glow at the center of the well brightened again, and this time it brought something with it. Symmetry. Not the symmetry of real stars, but the symmetry of possibilities. Those elegant, delicate shapes that form before the laws of physics select a single outcome. Symmetry wrapped the well in a soft geometry, folding, unfolding, repeating, reconsidering. Reality does not reconsider, but memory does. And this geometry belonged to memory. It spiraled gently outward, touching the surface of the well, and then radiating across the surrounding region. In a wave so quiet that only the instruments noticed it, the wave carried a signature identical to the echoes detected across time. Past, present, unreal, real. For a moment, they aligned, not merged, not fused, aligned, like four paths brushing against one another. Before diverging again, the weight of that alignment settled over the observatory, like the hush before a storm, because the meaning was unmistakable. Reality had acknowledged the presence of the unreal, not its existence. Existence requires mass and time, but its presence, the way the mind acknowledges an idea before deciding whether to believe it. The glow brightened once more, reaching toward the boundary. The boundary wavered, wavered again, held, but this time, holding felt like struggle, gentle, soft, like a parent resisting the small hand of a child. Trying to cross a threshold, the unreal pressed, the boundary trembled, reality listened, and then something happened that no one expected. The boundary shifted outward, not by much, barely the width of a breath, but enough to let a sliver of the glow spill into real space, a sliver so faint that it created no shadow, no distortion, no mass. But it existed, if only for a heartbeat. The researchers froze. The unreal had entered the real, not fully, not substantively, but meaningfully, and then it faded. Not like light vanishing, but like memory slipping back into the place where forgotten things go to rest. The boundary recoiled gently, as if startled by its own openness. Then it steadied. Then it stilled. The glow vanished. The well dimmed. The room exhaled. Nothing more happened for hours, but the meaning hung in the air, like a note that refused to die. One scientist finally spoke. The boundary wanted to open. Another added, it did not fail. It chose to. A third whispered, perhaps it has always been a choice. The idea moved through the observatory, like a soft current of electricity. If the boundary is a choice, then reality is not rigid. It is negotiated between matter and memory, between what is and what aches to be. The implications spiraled outward, through every mind in the room. Perhaps the unreal had never been powerless. Perhaps it had waited for the universe to be ready, to remember it fully. Perhaps the echoes in time were not accidents, but invitations. And perhaps the trembling was not instability, but anticipation. If so, what was the boundary anticipating? Night deepened, stars shifted, ghost reflections dimmed, memory wells fell silent. Then, one final phenomenon occurred. A faint ripple, barely perceptible, moved through the region of space, where the glow had touched reality. Not a distortion, not an echo, something quieter, a tenderness, a gentleness that suggested the boundary had not closed out of fear, but out of consideration for itself, for the unreal, for the balance between the two. It had tested the threshold. It had allowed contact. It had stepped back, but the step back did not feel like an ending. It felt like preparation. The astronomers understood that the universe had reached a threshold between remembering and allowing, between longing and forming, between possibility and presence. and they realized something else, something more profound than anything they had recorded in 20 chapters of Impossible Light. The boundary was not weakening, the boundary was evolving. It was learning the difference between separation and choice, a choice that had not yet been made. And as the final hours before dawn slipped through the sky, a question rose in every mind, soft as breath, heavy as destiny. If the universe ever chooses to let its forgotten futures step across the boundary, what will we see? When the first unreal star finally opens its eyes, chapter 20 ends there, not with an answer, but with a quiet space, where the answer might one day appear, like a light moving through the dark, from a star that has never existed, yet already knows how to shine.